Sign the admission forms, or I will have them lobotomize you right here. Elena. Richard Sterling barked as he signaled the security guards to pin me harder against the cold steel gurney. The leather straps bit into my wrists, cutting off circulation. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the accusation he spat at the doctor. My wife is suffering from severe postpartum psychosis and violent delusions. She tried to drown our son. She needs permanent isolation. Now. It was a lie. A perfectly crafted, $100 million lie designed to strip me of my human rights under the guise of medical necessity. Nurse Sophia stood by his side, her red lips curved into a smirk that screamed victory. She held the syringe like a trophy. I thrashed against the restraints, not because I was crazy, but because this was the only way to make them believe I was helpless. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a headache-inducing hum that matched the pounding of my heart. They wanted a show. I would give them a show. Richard leaned down, his expensive cologne choking me. He invaded my personal space, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper only I could hear. Do not fight it, darling. You are just making this harder on yourself if you sign the power of attorney over to me voluntarily. I might tell Sophia to lower the dosage. Maybe you will even wake up in a week instead of a month. He ran a finger down my cheek, an act of mock affection that made my skin crawl. Where is my son? I choked out, my voice raspy from the screaming I had done earlier to sell the performance. Richard chuckled, a low vibration that rattled in his chest. Christopher, do not worry about that burden anymore. I found him a new family, a nice couple in Switzerland who pays very well for healthy, white infants. He is already on a private jet. You will never see him again. The rage that exploded in my chest was real. It was white-hot and blinding. He had not just stolen my company. He had sold my flesh and blood like a piece of furniture. You monster! I screamed, lunging upward, testing the strength of the leather straps. This reaction was exactly what he wanted. See, Richard shouted, turning to the witnesses, the corrupted doctors and the silent orderlies. She is unstable. She is a danger to herself and others. Do it. Sedate her now. Sophia stepped forward, the needle glinting under the harsh lights. She did not hesitate. She did not look for a vein with care. She jammed the needle into my arm with the force of a personal vendetta. I gasped as the cold liquid burned its way into my muscle. Sweet dreams. Trash, she whispered, her eyes gleaming with malice. My body went limp. My eyelids fluttered. I let my head loll to the side, feigning the immediate shutdown of my nervous system through my eyelashes. I saw Richard pull Sophia close. He kissed her, right there over my paralyzed body, a passionate, disgusting display of victory. It is done, he said, smoothing his tie. The Sterling Empire is finally mine. And this bitch, she will rot in here until she forgets her own name. Their voices began to sound distant, but not because of the drugs. I was simply tuning them out. Retreating into the fortress of my mind, they thought they had won. They thought this was the end of Elena Vance. They saw a broken woman, a discardable wife, a liability. Richard laughed, the sound echoing off the sterile walls. Make sure she stays in the maximum security wing, he ordered the staff. No visitors, no lawyers. If she speaks, sedate her again. Bill everything to the Vance Trust. The irony was delicious. He was billing my own trust fund to torture me. He had no idea that the Vance Trust was not just a bank account. It was the controlling entity of this entire facility. St. Mary's Hill was not his prison for me. It was my cage for him. I lay perfectly still, controlling my breathing, slowing my heart rate. A technique I had mastered over 3 years of living with a sociopath. I had to wait. I had to let them leave. I had to let them believe the door was locked from the outside. The heavy steel door slammed shut with a finality that would have broken a lesser woman. The magnetic lock engaged with a loud thud. Silence returned to the room, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor I was hooked up to. I counted to 60 in my head. 1, 2, 3, 59, 60. My eyes snapped open. The dull, glazed look of a sedated patient vanished instantly, replaced by the sharp, calculating gaze of a predator. I sat up, ripping the sensors off my chest. The sedative Sophia had injected was nothing more than saline solution. I had swapped the vials in the supply room 3 hours ago during my manic episode where I ran through the halls. As for the pill they forced down my throat earlier, I spat it out into my palm. A simple sugar pill. I swung my legs off the gurney and walked to the reinforced glass window. Outside, Richard's car was pulling away. He was driving toward my penthouse, toward my safe, toward the trap I had set. He thought he was the king of New York. He was just a rat scurrying through a maze I designed. The electronic lock on the door beeped green. It did not open because of Richard's orders. It opened because my biometric data overrode every command in the system. Dr. Kane, the hospital director, walked in. He was not wearing his usual white coat. He was in a sharp black suit. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with reverence. He bowed his head slightly. "The transfer documents are ready, Madam Vance," he said, his voice steady. Mr. Sterling signed the admission paperwork as the guardian, but in his arrogance, he failed to read the fine print on page 42, by declaring you incompetent and assuming control. He also assumed full liability for the hospital's special debts. I walked over to the mirror, wiping the smeared mascara from my face. "And the baby?" I asked, my voice cold as ice. "Safe," Kane replied. "My team intercepted the private jet on the tarmac. The buyers are in custody. Christopher is with your sister in the safe house." I turned to face him, smoothing out the wrinkled hospital gown. "Good. Initiate phase 2. Lock down the facility. Richard Sterling thinks he just checked his wife into an asylum. Let us show him he just checked himself into hell." The morning sun that filtered through the reinforced glass of the VIP suite did not bring warmth. It only illuminated the cold precision of the trap I had spent the last 6 hours perfecting. I sat in the high-backed leather chair that Dr. Kane had brought in for me, sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea that cost more than the average American mortgage payment. My hospital gown was gone, replaced by a tailored charcoal business suit that screamed authority. My hair pulled back in a severe, impeccable bun. On the table in front of me sat the documents Richard was coming to force me to sign, specifically the irrevocable power of attorney that would hand him my entire estate. I watched the security feed on the tablet in my lap. Richard's black Bentley pulled up to the main entrance with an arrogance that made my stomach turn. He stepped out, adjusting his cufflinks, looking every inch the grieving husband about to make a difficult decision for his mentally unstable wife. He had no idea that the moment he crossed the threshold of St. Mary's Hill, he had ceased to be a visitor and had become a statistic in my ledger. Richard strode through the lobby, bypassing the reception desk with a dismissive wave of his hand, expecting the usual deference from the staff he believed he owned. But today, the atmosphere was thick, heavy, and suffocatingly silent. The nurses at the station did not look up to greet him. They kept their heads down, scribbling furiously on clipboards as if afraid to witness what was about to happen. A group of patients in the communal area stopped their card game and turned to watch him in unison, their eyes tracking his movement with a predatory intensity that made him falter for a fraction of a second. He loosened his tie, clearly unsettled by the lack of noise, by the absence of the usual chaotic hum of a mental institution. He pressed the button for the elevator, stabbing it multiple times with his impatient finger. When the doors slid open, there was no one inside, just a mirrored reflection of a man who thought he was a king, unaware he was walking into a guillotine. The ride up to the fourth floor took exactly 30 seconds, enough time for him to check his reflection, smooth his hair, and practice the fake look of concern he planned to wear when he saw me. The elevator chimed, a hollow sound that echoed down the empty corridor of the secure wing. Richard stepped out and marched toward room 402. He swiped his access card, expecting the green light. But the reader flashed red. He frowned, swiping it again. Harder this time, muttering curses under his breath about incompetent staff and cheap technology. Before he could shout for a nurse, the door clicked and slid open automatically. He stepped inside, ready to bark orders, ready to see a drugged, drooling mess tied to a bed. Instead, he found me sitting with my legs crossed. The picture of corporate elegance, the smell of expensive tea filling the air instead of the stench of fear he preferred. He froze, his mouth opening slightly, his brain struggling to process the visual disconnect. "You are awake," he stammered, the facade of the grieving husband slipping to reveal the confused predator beneath. "Sophia said she gave you enough sedatives to knock out a horse. Why are you not in restraints?" I placed the teacup down on the saucer with a deliberate, soft clink that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Sophia is currently unavailable to take your call. Richard, I believe she is down in the laundry sorting facility, learning the value of hard labor. As for the restraints, I found them uncomfortable." I picked up the pen from the table and twirled it between my fingers. Richard's confusion morphed instantly into rage. He slammed the door shut behind him and advanced on me, his face twisting into the ugly snarl I knew so well. "I do not know what kind of game you are playing, Elena, or who you paid off to get out of that bed. But it ends now. You are going to sign these papers, and then I am going to have them double the dose. I will turn you into a vegetable if I have to." He reached for me, his hand aiming for my throat, a move he had used a dozen times in the privacy of our bedroom. But this was not our bedroom, and I was no longer his victim. As his hand closed around my upper arm, intending to drag me out of the chair, I moved. I did not pull away. I drove the expensive fountain pen into the pressure point on the back of his hand. He howled, releasing his grip. But I did not stop there. I stood up, grabbing his index finger, the one he always used to point at me when he called me worthless, and bent it backward with a sickening, wet crunch that signified the tearing of ligaments. Richard screamed, dropping to his knees, clutching his hand to his chest. "You broke my finger. You crazy bitch. You actually broke it." I looked down at him, my expression devoid of any emotion other than mild annoyance. "Correction. Richard, I liquidated a liability. And do not use that language in my facility. It is unprofessional." I walked around the desk, towering over him as he gasped for air, his face pale with shock and pain. "You thought you were committing me to an asylum to steal my fortune. You failed to realize that the Vance Trust owns 51% of the parent company that operates this facility. You are not the client. Richard, you are trespassing on private property." He looked up at me, sweat beading on his forehead, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for a weapon or an ally. "That is impossible," he wheezed. "I checked the financials. The holding company is anonymous." I smiled, a cold, sharp expression that did not reach my eyes. "Exactly. Anonymous means you do not know who is holding the leash. Now, get out. Or stay. It really does not matter to me, because your choices have just been revoked." Richard scrambled to his feet, cradling his injured hand, his survival instinct finally overriding his greed. He lunged for the door, slamming his hand against the exit button. Nothing happened. He hit it again, and again. The door remained sealed tight. "Open this door. Open it now," he screamed, turning back to look at me with pure terror. "Let me out of here. I will sue you. I will burn this place to the ground." "You seem to be experiencing an acute episode of paranoia and aggression," I said calmly, tapping the tablet in my hand. "According to the hospital protocols you insisted we follow strictly, violent patients must be contained immediately for their own safety." The intercom in the ceiling crackled to life, Dr. Kane's voice filling the room. Smooth and professional. "Code red in the VIP wing. Patient is exhibiting self-harm behaviors and violent outbursts. Initiate containment protocol." Richard pounded on the glass, shouting for the guards he thought were on his payroll. "I am Richard Sterling. I am the CEO. Let me out." Outside the glass, 3 large orderlies appeared. They were not the ones he had bribed. These were new faces. Men with the build of linebackers and eyes that held zero sympathy. They did not open the door to let him out. They stood guard, crossing their arms, watching him like he was a specimen in a jar. Richard backed away from the glass, realizing for the first time that his money, his influence, and his loud voice held absolutely no power here. He turned to me, his breathing ragged. "You cannot do this. This is kidnapping. The police will come. My lawyers will come." I walked slowly toward the door, the sensors reading my biometric signature and sliding the glass panel open just enough for me to step into the hallway, leaving him trapped inside. "Your lawyers?" I asked, pausing at the threshold. "You mean the firm that just terminated your representation 5 minutes ago due to a conflict of interest? Or perhaps you mean the police, who are currently receiving a file containing evidence of attempted human trafficking regarding our son." The color drained from his face completely. I stepped out into the hallway, and the door slid shut, locking him in with a heavy mechanical thud that signaled the end of his freedom. Richard threw himself against the glass, sliding down to the floor, his expensive suit rumpled, his broken finger throbbing. He looked up, and his eyes focused on the digital nameplate mounted beside the door. It no longer read Elena Vance. The LED letters glowed bright red, spelling out his doom in high-definition: patient Richard Sterling. Diagnosis: narcissistic personality disorder with psychotic features. Status: involuntary hold. He stared at the name, mouthing the words, shaking his head in denial. But the reality was staring him in the face. He was in the box he had built for me. I turned to Dr. Kane, who was waiting with a clipboard. "Start him on the standard intake procedure, doctor, and make sure he gets the same care he ordered for me. No special treatment." I walked away down the long, sterile corridor, the sound of Richard's muffled screams fading behind me, music to my ears. The sound of Richard Sterling's expensive Italian leather shoes kicking against the reinforced polycarbonate glass was a rhythmic thudding that echoed through the observation room speakers. A desperate drumbeat of a man realizing his credit limit had just hit 0. I stood behind the one-way mirror, arms crossed, watching the creature who had once been my husband reduce himself to a feral animal. He was screaming, his voice cracking with a mix of rage and panic, his broken finger cradled against his chest like a wounded bird. "I will give you $50,000 cash right now," he bellowed at the stone-faced orderly standing guard outside the door. "Do you hear me? I am the CEO of Sterling Vance. I make more in an hour than you make in a decade. Open this door, and I will buy you a new house." The orderly did not even blink. He simply tapped his earpiece and muttered a code into the microphone, treating Richard's desperate bribery attempts as nothing more than symptoms of his diagnosis. This was the beauty of the system Richard had built. He had designed St. Mary's Hill to be impervious to the pleas of the patients, ensuring that once you were in, your voice became meaningless noise. The heavy magnetic lock on the door disengaged with a mechanical hiss, and Richard scrambled back, a flash of hope igniting in his eyes. He thought his money had finally worked, that the golden parachute of capitalism had deployed to save him. But when the door swung open, it was not a concierge with a release form. It was a tactical team of 4 orderlies wearing protective padding and face shields, led by the towering head of security, a man Richard had fired 2 years ago without severance. Richard recognized him instantly, his face draining of color. "Mr. Sterling," the security chief said, his voice distorted by the mask. Calm and terrifyingly professional. "You are violating the noise ordinance of the facility and disrupting the recovery of other clients. We need you to calm down voluntarily, or we will assist you." Richard backed into the corner, his eyes darting around for a weapon. But the room was padded, stripped of anything sharp or heavy. "Do not touch me." Richard shrieked, lashing out with his good hand. "I am not a patient, I am the owner. Check the records, check the damn records." The security chief sighed, a sound of bored resignation. "Patient is non-compliant and combative. Authorization for physical restraint granted under Protocol 7. The team moved in with the efficiency of a pack of wolves taking down a lame deer. Richard threw a punch, a clumsy, desperate swing that landed harmlessly on the padded armor of the lead orderly. The response was immediate and overwhelming. A stun baton crackled with a menacing blue arc of electricity, the sound sharp and biting in the small room. They did not strike him with full force. They simply touched the tip to his thigh. Richard convulsed, his legs giving out instantly as his muscles seized, dropping him to the floor with a heavy thud. He gasped for air, drool pooling at the corner of his mouth, the indignity of the situation hitting him harder than the voltage. They did not beat him. That would be a lawsuit. They managed him. They neutralized a threat. 2 men pinned his shoulders while another secured his legs. The zip ties cinched tight around his wrists and ankles, plastic biting into skin, turning the master of the universe into a bundled package ready for transport. "Get off me, I will sue you, I will kill you all." Richard screamed into the floor, his face pressed against the cold linoleum. The door opened again, and Dr. Kane walked in, holding a tablet, the harsh fluorescent light reflecting off his rimless glasses. He looked down at Richard with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a lab rat that had failed a maze. Excessive aggression, delusions of grandeur, and violent outbursts. Kane dictated into his voice recorder, ignoring the man writhing at his feet. "Patient claims to be the CEO and threatens lethal violence against staff. This confirms the diagnosis of acute manic psychosis with paranoid features. We need to stabilize his neurochemistry immediately." Richard twisted his head up, tears of pain and humiliation streaming down his face. "Kane, it is me, Richard. Stop this charade. I know Elena paid you, I will double it, triple it." Dr. Kane crouched down, not to help, but to inspect Richard's pupils with a penlight, blinding him temporarily. "Mr. Sterling," Kane said softly, his voice dripping with condescension. "Money is a construct you are using to mask your trauma. There is no conspiracy. You are unwell, and we are going to fix you." The orderlies hauled Richard up, his feet dragging uselessly on the floor as they marched him down the hallway. This was the Walk of Shame, a specialized corridor designed with glass walls so other patients could see the consequences of resistance. Richard struggled weakly, but the sedative from the earlier calming touch was beginning to haze his mind. They brought him to the hydrotherapy room, a polite name for a place where dignity went to die. "Hygiene protocol," the chief announced. They stripped him of his ruined Italian suit, cutting the fabric with safety shears because his struggles made buttons too difficult to manage. Naked, shivering, and exposed. Richard Sterling was blasted with high-pressure jets of cold water, ostensibly to decontaminate him, but in reality, to wash away the last shreds of his ego. He stood there, a man who used to command boardrooms, now cowering and covering himself while strangers scrubbed him with rough brushes like he was a piece of dirty equipment. I zoomed in on the camera feed, watching every second of it. This was the exact treatment he had ordered for the charity cases in the basement wing to save on hot water costs. Karma was not just a concept, it was a cold shower. After the decontamination, they dressed him in the standard issue gray jumpsuit, the fabric coarse and irritating against his skin. It was 3 sizes too big, swallowing his frame, making him look small, pathetic. They strapped him into a wheelchair, restraining his chest and arms, and wheeled him into the treatment center. This was the heart of St. Mary's Hill, a room filled with machines that looked like torture devices masked as medical miracles. In the center of the room sat the chair, a heavy, padded recliner with thick leather straps and wires dangling from an overhead console. Dr. Kane was already there, adjusting the dials on a machine that hummed with a low, ominous frequency. "We are going to attempt electroconvulsive therapy," Kane explained to the air, or perhaps to the camera he knew I was watching. "The patient's delusions are deeply rooted. We need to reset the neural pathways to allow reality to penetrate." Richard's eyes widened, the white showing all around the irises. "No. No shock, that is illegal. You need consent." Kane smiled, holding up a piece of paper. "We have consent. Richard, you signed the power of attorney over to your wife this morning. Remember, and Madame Vance has graciously authorized any and all treatments deemed necessary for your recovery." They transferred him to the chair. The leather straps were tightened across his chest, his thighs, and his forehead. He was immobilized, a statue of terror. A nurse applied conductive gel to his temples, the cold substance making him flinch. "Please," Richard whispered, his voice broken, the fight finally draining out of him. "Please, just let me call someone. Anyone." The room fell silent. The heavy steel door at the back of the room opened. The click of my heels on the tile floor was the only sound as I approached the chair. Richard strained against the head strap to see me. I stood over him, wearing the same cold expression he had worn yesterday. I leaned down, bringing my face inches from his, invading his space just as he had done to me. I could smell the fear on him, a sour, metallic scent that masked the antiseptic. "Elena," he choked out, "baby, please, stop this. I will give you everything. The company, the house, the accounts. Just tell them to stop." I reached out and gently stroked his cheek, mimicking the caress he had given me before he ordered Sophia to inject me. The gesture made him tremble. "Do not fight it, darling," I whispered, repeating his exact words back to him, savoring the way his pupils contracted in recognition. "You are just making this harder on yourself. If you behave. I might tell Dr. Kane to lower the voltage next time. Maybe you will even remember your name in a week instead of a month." I pulled back, my face hardening into stone. "But right now, you need to learn a lesson about ownership. You thought people were assets you could liquidate. Well, Richard, welcome to the inventory." I turned to Dr. Kane and nodded. "Proceed with the adjustment, doctor. Maximum therapeutic setting." "Wait, Elena, no!" Richard screamed, thrashing against the unyielding leather. Dr. Kane placed a rubber bite block into Richard's mouth to keep him from biting his tongue off, silencing his pleas into muffled, guttural moans. The machine whirred to life, a high-pitched whine that climbed higher and higher. I watched Richard's eyes locked on mine, pleading, begging, filled with the realization of absolute horror. He was not looking at his wife. He was looking at his executioner. Dr. Kane pressed the button. Richard's body arched against the straps, every muscle locking rigid as the current flooded his brain. His toes curled, his knuckles turned white, and a single tear escaped his eye before his consciousness was wiped clean by the white noise of electricity. It lasted only 10 seconds, but in that room, it felt like an eternity. The machine beeped, signaling the end of the cycle. Richard slumped back into the chair, unconscious, his breathing shallow. "Vital signs are stable," the nurse announced, checking the monitor. "Memory centers should be significantly disrupted." Dr. Kane made a note on his chart. "Excellent when he wakes up. His confusion will be genuine, which will justify a second session. We will keep him in a state of manufactured fog for at least a week." I looked at the man who had tormented me for years, now reduced to a drooling, senseless lump. It was satisfying. Yes, but the fire in my chest had not yet burned out. This was just the husband. The mistress was still waiting her turn. "Take him to the isolation ward," I ordered, checking my watch. "I have another appointment. Sophia should be settling into her new accommodations by now. I hear the general population wing is very lively this time of day." I turned on my heel and walked out of the treatment room, leaving the smell of ozone and burnt ego behind me. The game had only just begun, and I had plenty of tokens left to play. The elevator ride down to the basement level of St. Mary's Hill felt like a descent into the underworld, unlike the sterile, hushed luxury of the VIP wing where Richard was currently losing his mind. The general population unit smelled of industrial bleach, stale cabbage, and raw desperation. This was the warehouse for the forgotten. The people whose families had stopped paying the premium rates. The ones Sophia had spent years tormenting with her sharp needles and cruel whispers. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer, checking my reflection in the polished steel doors. Dr. Kane stood beside me, clutching a thick black binder labeled "Personnel Violation Sophia Miller." He looked nervous, not because of the environment, but because he knew exactly what kind of monster we were about to corner. "She has been placed in the common room, Madam Vance," Kane murmured, his voice barely audible over the hum of the descending car. "The other residents are agitated. Her presence has disrupted the ecosystem." I smiled, a cold, humorless expression. "Good. An ecosystem needs a predator to keep it balanced. Today, Sophia learns she is no longer at the top of the food chain." The doors slid open with a grinding metal screech that sounded like a warning. The noise hit us first, a chaotic symphony of shouting, manic laughter, and the heavy thud of bodies hitting padded walls. We stepped into the observation cage, a secure glass-walled office that overlooked the main floor. Down below, the scene was chaotic. Sophia was standing in the center of the room, still wearing her pristine white nurse's uniform. Though it was now stained with coffee and wrinkled from a struggle, she was screaming at a large, hulking man who was circling her like a shark. "Do not touch me," Sophia shrieked, her voice shrill and commanding, a tone she had used on these people 1,000 times before. "I am the head nurse. I control your medication. Sit down right now, or I will have you strapped to a bed for a week." The man, a former linebacker named Tiny who suffered from severe PTSD, stopped and tilted his head. He did not look scared. He looked confused. And then, slowly, he began to smile. It was not a friendly smile. Nurse Sophia," Tiny rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly. "You do not have your keys." He pointed a thick finger at her waist. "No keys, no buzzer, no needle." The realization rippled through the room. The other patients, who had been cowering in the corners out of habit, began to step forward. They saw what Tiny saw. The predator had been defanged. Sophia backed away, bumping into a table. "Security!" she screamed, looking up at the cameras. "Get down here. These animals are threatening me." That was my cue. I pressed the button on the intercom, my voice booming through the overhead speakers, cutting through the noise like a blade. "Attention, residents. Please step away from the intruder. Management is coming down to handle the pest control." The sound of my voice froze Sophia in her tracks. She looked up at the observation window, her eyes locking onto mine. Even from this distance, I could see the color drain from her face as she realized the management was the woman she had tried to destroy only hours ago. I walked down the metal staircase that led to the floor, flanked by 4 security guards who wielded their stun batons with practiced ease. The sea of patients parted for me, a mix of fear and reverence in their eyes. They sensed the shift in power. I stopped 5 feet away from Sophia. She looked pathetic, clutching her arms, her expensive blowout ruined by the humidity of the basement. "Elena," she gasped, her voice trembling. "Oh my God. Elena, thank God. You have to get me out of here. Richard is insane. He dragged me into this. He made me do it." She rushed toward me, reaching out as if we were old friends. My lead guard stepped forward, blocking her path with a massive forearm. Sophia stumbled back, looking at me with wide, pleading eyes. "Please, tell them. Tell them I was just following orders. I can testify against him. I have evidence. I kept recordings." I laughed, a dry, sharp sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Recordings. That is adorable, Sophia. But I do not need your evidence against Richard. I have my own." I signaled Dr. Kane, who stepped forward and opened the black binder. "Sophia Miller," I began, my voice calm and professional, reciting the facts like a judge reading a death sentence. "Employment terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct, patient abuse, and practicing medicine without a valid license." Sophia's jaw dropped. "What? My license is valid? I went to nursing school?" I shook my head, clicking my tongue. "Actually, according to the state board database which I updated 10 minutes ago, your license was revoked 3 years ago for stealing narcotics." Strange how Richard never noticed that. Or maybe he just did not care as long as you kept his secrets. "This is illegal," Sophia spat, her fear turning back into venom. "You cannot keep me here. I am a citizen. I have rights." I took a step closer, invading her personal space. "Rights. Did you read the fine print of the employment contract you signed, Sophia? The one that includes a clause about mandatory on-site mental health evaluation if an employee exhibits erratic behavior." I gestured to the room around us, screaming at patients, "Delusions of authority, paranoia. You fit the profile perfectly." Sophia looked around the room. The patients were closing in again, drawn by the conflict. They were listening. They understood that the woman who had tormented them was now fair game. "You are bluffing," Sophia hissed, though her voice lacked conviction. "Richard will come for me. He will burn this place down." I leaned in close, whispering so only she could hear. "Richard is currently in the isolation wing, drooling on himself after a maximum voltage therapy session. He has forgotten his own name, let alone yours. You are alone, Sophia, completely, utterly alone." The reality hit her like a physical blow. Her knees buckled, and she grabbed the edge of a plastic table to stay upright. "What do you want?" she whispered, tears finally spilling over. "Money. I have money saved. I can pay you." "I do not want your dirty money," I said, disgust dripping from every word. "I want justice, not for me, for them." I pointed to a frail woman in the corner, rocking back and forth. That is Mrs. Higgins. You kept her in restraints for 48 hours straight because she spilled her juice. You told her that her children had died, just to watch her cry. I pointed to Tiny. And him. You replaced his anxiety medication with laxatives and laughed when he humiliated himself in the cafeteria. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Anger was building, a palpable heat rising from the crowd. Sophia shrank back, shaking her head. No, that was discipline. I was doing my job. Your job is over, I announced. I snapped my fingers. Dr. Kane handed me a silver tray. On it sat a single syringe, filled with a cloudy, amber liquid. It was the special cocktail. Sophia was famous for a mix of high-grade paralytics and hallucinogens that trapped the victim in a waking nightmare, unable to move or speak, but feeling everything. Sophia recognized it instantly. She let out a strangled cry of terror. No, no, not that, please. Elena, anything but that. It feels like you are buried alive. Please. She fell to her knees, grabbing the hem of my pants. I kicked her hand away, wiping the spot where she touched me. Irony is a cruel mistress, isn't it? I said coldly. You use this to silence people. Now, it is going to help you listen. I did not administer the shot. That would be too personal. I handed the tray to Dr. Kane. Process her, I ordered. Standard intake protocol for a violent patient. 2 guards grabbed Sophia, lifting her off the ground as she kicked and screamed, calling me every name in the book. You witch! You gold-digging whore, I will kill you! The needle went in. Her screams turned into a gurgle, then silence. Her body went limp, but her eyes remained wide open, darting frantically from side to side. The paralytic worked fast. I watched as the terror froze on her face. She was trapped in her own body, a prisoner of her own chemistry. Leave her here, I told the guards. The general population wing believes in community support. I am sure the other residents would love to help her get comfortable. The guards dropped her onto one of the vinyl beanbag chairs in the center of the room. I turned to the patients, who were watching with wide, fascinated eyes. She is all yours, I said, my voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. She cannot move, she cannot speak, but she can hear you. Tell her how you feel. Tell her everything she did to you. As I walked back toward the staircase, the mob began to descend. They did not attack her physically. They knew the cameras were watching. Instead, they formed a circle around her paralyzed body. Mrs. Higgins leaned in close, whispering something into Sophia's ear that made Sophia's eyes widen in sheer panic. Tiny sat down next to her, patting her hand with a heavy, mocking gentleness. Do not worry, nurse, he rumbled. We will take good care of you, just like you took care of us. The psychological torture had begun. Sophia would spend the next 12 hours unable to blink, forced to listen to the whispers of her victims, trapped in a hallucination of her own making. I ascended the stairs, the sounds of the basement fading into a dull roar beneath the heavy steel door. Dr. Kane walked beside me, wiping sweat from his forehead. That was efficient, he noted, his voice shaky. But Madam Vance, we have a problem. I stopped, my hand on the biometric scanner of the exit. What now? I asked, impatient to get back to the surface. Is Richard awake? No, Kane said, checking his tablet. It is the board of directors. They just received an anonymous tip about the irregularities in the admission process today. They are calling for an emergency audit. They are sending a team tomorrow morning. I froze. An audit. If they looked too closely at the paperwork before I had time to sanitize the digital trail, they would see that Richard's signature was coerced. Or worse. They would find the real medical records I had hidden. The trap was sprung, but the cage was rattling. "Who sent the tip?" I demanded. Kane swiped the screen. "It was sent from an encrypted server, but the IP address traces back to your penthouse." My blood ran cold. My penthouse was empty. My sister and son were at the safe house. No one had access to my private server. "Someone is in my house," I whispered. "Someone who knows the system." I pushed the door open, striding into the bright, clean hallway of the first floor. "Get the car, Kane. Forget the audit. We have a breach." I pulled out my phone, dialing the security feed for my home. The screen was black. Video loss. The error message read, "The game was not over. Someone else was playing, and they had just made a move on my king." The rain on Fifth Avenue was coming down in sheets, transforming the city lights into smeared, bleeding streaks of neon against the windshield of my Aston Martin. I was doing 80 miles per hour in a 30 zone, weaving through the late-night traffic with a reckless precision that would have terrified my former self. But the woman who used to brake for yellow lights was dead, killed by 3 years of gaslighting and a needle in the arm. The woman driving this car was a different creature entirely. One who had just sentenced her husband to a living hell and was now racing to protect the only thing that mattered more than revenge: my empire. The phone on the passenger seat remained stubbornly silent. A black brick that refused to connect to the smart home system of the penthouse. Video loss. Security breach. 2 phrases that terrified me more than any physical threat. If the board of directors found out I had kidnapped Richard before the legal paperwork was fully ironed out, I would trade places with him in that padded cell within 24 hours. I skidded to a halt in front of the building, tossing the keys to the valet without a word. The doorman, George, a man who had worked for my family since I was a child, tipped his hat. He looked calm, too calm. "Good evening, Madam Vance. Mr. Sterling arrived about 20 minutes ago. He said he forgot his keycard." I froze, my hand halfway to the door handle. Richard was currently strapped to a bed in Queens, his brain scrambling from 100 volts of electricity. "Mr. Sterling is upstairs," I repeated, keeping my voice steady. George nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He seemed in a hurry. He went straight up to the penthouse. A cold shiver went down my spine, sharper than the wind coming off the Hudson River. Whoever was in my apartment had not just broken in. They had walked in wearing my husband's face, or at least enough of a resemblance to fool a doorman who had known Richard for 5 years. This was not a burglar. This was a professional. The elevator ride to the 45th floor took a lifetime. I watched the numbers climb, my hand slipping into my purse to grip the cold steel of the snub-nose revolver I had started carrying a month ago. It was unregistered, untraceable, and fully loaded. The doors slid open directly into the foyer. The penthouse was dark, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the storm battering Manhattan. The silence was heavy, thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and aged scotch. It was the smell of power, of arrogance. I kicked off my heels so I could move silently across the marble floor, the gun raised, my finger tightening on the trigger. The living room was shadowed, lit only by the lightning that flashed intermittently outside. And there, sitting in Richard's favorite wingback chair facing the window, was a silhouette. He was holding a glass of amber liquid, swirling it gently, the ice clinking with a rhythmic, maddening slowness. "Turn around slowly," I commanded, my voice low and lethal, "or I will paint the wall with your brains." The figure did not flinch. He did not jump. He simply took a sip of the drink, savoring it. "Excellent vintage, Elena. Richard has terrible taste in women. Clearly. But his choice in Highland Park is commendable." The voice was not Richard's. It was deeper, smoother, carrying a hint of a mid-Atlantic accent that reeked of old money and Ivy League secret societies. The chair swiveled slowly. A flash of lightning illuminated the intruder. He was younger than Richard, perhaps in his early 30s, with sharp, predatory features and eyes that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. He was wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than the car I had just parked. He looked at the gun in my hand with mild amusement, as if I were holding a toy. "Who are you?" I asked, taking a step closer, keeping the aim steady at his chest. "And why are you using my private server to email the board of directors?" The man set the glass down on the side table. He tapped a key on the laptop resting on his knees. My laptop. The giant television screen on the wall flickered to life. It was not a cable channel. It was a live feed from St. Mary's Hill. Specifically, the camera inside the general population common room. On the screen, Sophia was slumped in the beanbag chair, her eyes wide with terror as the other patients whispered into her ear. The intruder gestured to the screen with an open hand. Cinema verite at its finest, the way you utilize the patients as a psychological weapon, brutal, elegant, efficient. I have not seen a takedown that clean since your father dissolved the strikers' union in the 90s. The mention of my father made my finger twitch on the trigger. "You have 3 seconds to give me a name before I pull this trigger." The man smiled, a wolfish expression that was both charming and terrifying. "My name is Julian Blackwood, and if you shoot me..." The email scheduled to go out to the Securities and Exchange Commission in exactly 5 minutes will not be canceled. That email contains the raw footage of you forging Richard's signature on the admission forms. Kidnapping, fraud, assault. You would go to federal prison for 30 years. Elena. And your son? He would go into the foster system. I lowered the gun slightly, my mind racing. Julian Blackwood. The name was a ghost story in the corporate world. A fixer. A man who did not exist on paper but whose fingerprints were on every hostile takeover and corporate cover-up in New York for the last decade. You are the one who tipped off the board. I realized, the pieces clicking together. You created the threat of the audit. Julian nodded, closing the laptop. I needed to get your attention. You are a hard woman to reach when you are busy electrocuting your spouse. He stood up, and I instinctively tensed, raising the gun again. He raised his hands in a mocking gesture of surrender. "Relax. I am not here to rescue Richard. I hated the man. He was a sloppy, greedy amateur who did not know how to wield the power he married into. Watching you break him was the highlight of my fiscal year." He walked over to the bar and poured himself another drink, completely disregarding the weapon pointed at his back. "Then what do you want?" I asked, my voice hard. "Money. A seat on the board. Name your price." Julian turned, leaning against the mahogany bar. "I do not want money. I have enough money to buy this building and evict you just for sport. I want an alliance." He took a sip, his eyes locking onto mine. "You see, Elena, you think you have won. You took out the husband and the mistress. You think the board audit is your biggest problem. It is not. The audit is a smokescreen I created to test your reflexes. Your real problem is that Richard was not working alone." The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "Richard was a narcissist. He did not share power. Richard was a puppet." Julian corrected. "He was being fed information. How do you think he knew about the loopholes in the Vance Trust? How did he know exactly when to strike when you were vulnerable after the birth? Someone gave him the playbook. Someone who wanted your father's legacy destroyed from the inside." He walked toward me, stopping just inches from the barrel of the gun. He smelled of rain and danger. I was your father's personal attorney for the last 5 years of his life. Not the one on the letterhead. The real one. The one who handled the things he could not tell the shareholders. My heart hammered against my ribs. My father had died of a sudden heart attack 2 years ago. It had been ruled natural causes. My father trusted no one, I whispered. He certainly would not have trusted a shark like you. Julian reached into his jacket pocket. I tensed, ready to fire. But he pulled out a slim silver flash drive. He held it up between two fingers. He trusted me because I was the only one who knew the truth about his death. It was not a heart attack. Elena. It was a chemically induced cardiac arrest. The same compound Richard's little nurse used on her patients. Richard did not just try to steal your company. He murdered your father to clear the path to you. The room spun. The gun felt heavy in my hand. Murder. Richard was a thief, an abuser, a monster. But a murderer, and Sophia. The drug. The connection was sickeningly logical. You have proof? I asked. My voice barely a whisper. Julian tossed the flash drive to me. I caught it with my free hand. Toxicology reports? Emails between Richard and a supplier in Zurich. Bank transfers paying off the coroner. It is all there. I have been sitting on it, waiting for you to wake up, waiting to see if you were your father's daughter, or just a victim. He looked at the screen where Sophia was still frozen in her nightmare. Tonight. You proved you have the stomach for the truth. So, you want justice? I said, skeptical. A man like you does not care about justice. Julian laughed softly. Correct. I do not care about justice. I care about the Vance Trust. Your father and I. We were building something. A network. Richard was dismantling it. Selling off pieces to our competitors. I want the network restored. I want back in. He checked his watch. The email to the SEC is set to send in 90 seconds. I can cancel it. I can make the audit disappear. I can make the video of you breaking Richard's finger vanish from the cloud forever. I can be the shield you need against the board. And in exchange? I asked, knowing the price would be steep. In exchange, Julian said, his eyes gleaming. You give me full control of the Black Ledger, the offshore accounts your father used to fund his black ops. I know you have the biometric key. It is in your DNA. The Black Ledger, the myth, the reason my father was feared by senators and warlords alike. It wasn't just money. It was information, blackmail material on half the global elite. You want to be the king, I said, and you want me to be the figurehead. No. Julian stepped closer, his hand gently pushing the barrel of the gun down until it pointed at the floor. I want a partner. Richard was a liability. You are an asset. A lethal weapon that just needed to be aimed in the right direction. He held out his hand. Cancel the audit, bury Richard, and let us go after the people who actually ordered the hit on your father. Richard was just the gun. Elena. I know who pulled the trigger. I looked at his hand, then at the flash drive. The storm raged outside, mirroring the chaos inside my head. I had thought the game was over. I thought I had won, but Julian was opening a door to a much larger, darker room. If I refused, he would send me to prison. If I accepted, I would be making a deal with a devil who knew too much, but looking at his eyes, I saw the same fire I felt, the need for total control, the hatred of weakness. I holstered the gun, the click echoing in the silent penthouse. I did not shake his hand. Instead, I walked past him to the laptop, typing in the cancellation code for the security breach that only I knew. The screen flashed audit request canceled. I turned back to him. You handle the board, you scrub the footage, and you give me the name of the person who ordered my father's death. Julian smiled, picking up his glass of scotch for a toast. The name, he said, taking a sip, is waiting on that drive. But I suggest you pour yourself a drink first, because the person who killed your father is the one person you invited to dinner next week. The single name glowing on the laptop screen felt like a physical blow to my chest. Martha Vance, my father's younger sister, the woman who had taught me how to ride a horse, who had held my hand at my father's funeral, and who had gifted me a vintage diamond necklace for my wedding to Richard. I stared at the toxicology report Julian had decrypted. The wire transfers were not just numbers, they were a map of betrayal. Martha had authorized the payment for the chemical compound that stopped my father's heart 2 years ago. She had not pulled the trigger, but she had bought the gun, loaded it, and handed it to Richard with a smile. The scotch in my glass suddenly tasted like ash. I looked up at Julian, who was watching me with the clinical detachment of a surgeon waiting for the anesthesia to take effect. He did not offer pity. He offered a strategy. "She is the one," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "My aunt, the philanthropist, the woman who chairs the board of 3 children's hospitals." Julian nodded, closing the laptop with a snap that echoed in the silent penthouse. The most dangerous predators always camouflage themselves as herbivores. "Elena, Martha has been siphoning funds from the Vance Trust for a decade. Your father found out. He was going to cut her off. That is why she removed him. Richard was just the ambitious idiot she found to do the dirty work. He thinks he is a partner. In reality, he is just the hired help." I stood up, walking to the window to look out at the storm. My entire life was a lie constructed by the people supposed to protect me. "Dinner is in 1 hour," I said, checking my watch. "She invited us a month ago, a celebration of the company's quarterly earnings." "You have to go," Julian said, stepping up beside me. "If you cancel, she will know something is wrong. She is expecting a broken wife and a triumphant husband. We need to give her a performance." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, black device, no larger than a button. "This is a kinetic audio bug. Planted in her study. I need access to her private line. Richard will call her. He is desperate, broken, and confused. When he wakes up in that cell and realizes you are not coming back, he will reach out to the only person he thinks has more power than you." I took the device, closing my fingers around the cold metal. "And what will you be doing?" I asked. Julian smiled, adjusting his silk tie. "I will be your +1. It is time Aunt Martha met the new management." The drive to the Vance estate in the Upper East Side was silent. The rain lashed against the windows of the limousine, washing away the city grime but failing to cleanse the dread pooling in my stomach. The mansion stood behind iron gates, a fortress of limestone and old money. This was the house where I grew up, where my father had built his empire, and where his murderer now slept in the master suite. George, the family chauffeur, opened the door. I stepped out, my face composed into a mask of fragile exhaustion. I was wearing black, mourning clothes for a marriage that was not yet legally dead. Julian stepped out behind me, his presence dark and imposing. He offered me his arm. "Remember," he whispered, "you are the victim. Let her underestimate you." The heavy oak doors opened, and there she was. Martha Vance stood in the foyer, draped in white cashmere, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. She looked like the grandmother everyone wished they had. She rushed forward, her arms open, enveloping me in a hug that smelled of lavender and deception. "Elena, my darling," she cooed, pulling back to inspect my face. "You look terrible, so pale. Where is Richard? He said he would be driving you." I let my shoulders slump, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. "Richard is unwell. Aunt Martha. He had a severe episode this morning. Dr. Kane said it was a psychotic break. We had to admit him to St. Mary's Hill immediately. I felt her body stiffen. It was subtle, a microscopic tensing of the muscles. But I felt it. Her eyes flickered with something sharp before returning to warm concern. Oh, my heavens. That is tragic. Is it permanent? She was not asking about his health. She was asking about his utility. We do not know, I whispered. I am just so overwhelmed. Martha patted my hand, her eyes shifting to the man standing silently behind me. And who is this? Did you bring a doctor? Julian stepped forward, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. Julian Blackwood, crisis management and strategic consultant. Madame Vance hired me to handle the public relations fallout of her husband's unfortunate condition. Martha's smile faltered. She knew the name. Everyone in the high-stakes world of New York finance knew the name Blackwood. He was the man you called when you wanted to bury a body, not issue a press release. Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice dropping an octave. I was not aware my niece required such aggressive representation. Julian took her hand, not to kiss it, but to hold it a second too long. These are aggressive times. Martha. May I call you Martha? Elena needs a shield. I am here to ensure no one takes advantage of her vulnerability. The threat hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. Martha withdrew her hand slowly. Well, come in. Dinner is served. We have much to discuss. The dining room was a cavernous hall lit by a crystal chandelier that had hung there since the Titanic sank. We sat at the long mahogany table, the distance between us measured in feet and secrets. The servers moved like ghosts, placing plates of consommé in front of us. Martha sat at the head of the table, my father's seat. She picked up her spoon, her gaze fixed on me. So, she began, her tone casual. With Richard incapacitated, who is handling the proxy votes for the upcoming board meeting? You know the bylaws require a male signatory for certain asset transfers. It was a lie, a sexist, outdated lie she used to manipulate me for years. I am aware of the bylaws, I said, stirring my soup. That is why Julian is reviewing the corporate charter. It seems there are many irregularities in how the trust has been managed lately. Martha's spoon clattered against her bowl. Irregularities. That is a strong word. Elena, the trust is stronger than ever. Richard and I have been very diligent. She name-dropped him intentionally, testing the waters. Richard was diligent, Julian interjected, taking a sip of red wine. Diligent in funneling $3 million a month into a shell company in the Cayman Islands, a company registered to an anonymous holding group. He paused, looking directly at Martha. We are currently tracing the ultimate beneficiary. It takes time, but the digital trail always leads somewhere. Martha went pale. She wiped her mouth with a linen napkin, her hand trembling slightly. I am sure there is a misunderstanding. Richard was always creative with his accounting. She stood up abruptly. I need to check on dessert, excuse me. She walked out of the room, her pace brisk, almost a run. Julian pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. He handed me an earpiece. She is not checking on dessert. She is going to her study. The bug you planted in the flower arrangement is live. I put the earpiece in. The sound of static clearing to reveal the sound of a heavy door locking. Then, the sound of dialing. Pick up. Martha's voice hissed in my ear. Pick up. You incompetent fool. She was calling Richard, but Richard was in a padded cell. How could he answer? Julian tapped his tablet. I unblocked his outgoing calls for exactly 5 minutes. I routed his call to her private line. Listen. A click. Then a voice I recognized. But it was broken, sobbing, unrecognizable from the arrogant man who had tried to commit me this morning. Martha, Martha, thank God. Richard sounded like he was weeping. You have to get me out of here. She is insane. Elena is insane. She fried my brain. Martha. They put me in the chair. They broke my finger. Shut up, Richard, Martha snapped, her voice cold and devoid of empathy. Lower your voice. Where are you? I am in the isolation ward, Richard cried. I bribed an orderly with my watch to get this phone. You have to send the lawyers. You have to trigger the contingency plan. Tell them I am the CEO. Get me out. And I will sign whatever you want. I will kill her. Martha. I swear I will kill her with my own hands this time. I sat at the dinner table, staring at the empty chair at the head of the table, listening to my husband beg his partner in crime for salvation. Martha's silence on the line was deafening. Richard, she said finally, her tone flat. You failed. You were supposed to secure the signature and put her away quietly. Instead, you let her bring Julian Blackwood into my house. Do you know who that is? You brought a wolf to my doorstep. I did not know, Richard screamed. Please, Martha, we are family. I did it for you. I killed him for you. My breath caught in my throat. There it was. The confession. Recorded. Undeniable. Julian looked at me and nodded. We had it. But Martha was not done. You are not family, Richard, Martha said, her voice turning to ice. You were a tool, and a broken tool is a liability. She paused. Listen to me carefully. I cannot have you babbling about the past to anyone. If Blackwood is involved, he will dig until he finds the bones. I cannot risk that. What? What are you saying? Richard stammered, the fear in his voice spiking. I am saying that your insurance policy just expired. Martha replied. I am calling the director of the board. We will have you transferred to the state facility upstate by morning, the maximum security wing for the criminally insane. Accidents happen there all the time. Richard, patients slip in the shower. They choke on their food. Or they hang themselves out of shame. No, Martha, you cannot, Richard howled. Goodbye, Richard. Do not call this number again. The line went dead. I took the earpiece out, my hand shaking. She had just ordered his execution. She was going to have him moved to a state prison and murdered to cover her tracks. Richard was a monster. Yes, but he was my monster, and he was the only witness who could send Martha to prison for life. If he died. The link between her and my father's murder died with him. Julian looked at me, his expression grave. She is cutting the loose ends. If she moves him to the state facility, we lose him, and we lose the case. We cannot let her move him, I said, standing up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, tactical fury. Richard Sterling belongs to me. No one touches him until I say so. Martha walked back into the dining room, a bright, fake smile plastered on her face. Sorry about that. Just a small domestic issue with the staff. Now, where were we? She sat down, picking up her wine glass. You were telling me about your plans for the trust, Mr. Blackwood. I looked at the woman who had ordered my father's death and was now planning my husband's murder while eating soup. I picked up my knife, the silver glinting in the candlelight. Actually, Aunt Martha, I said, my voice steady and dangerous. We were just discussing the concept of liquidation. It is a fascinating business term. It means converting assets into cash, or eliminating liabilities. Martha froze, the glass halfway to her lips. She looked at me, and for the first time, she saw the predator behind the mask. I beg your pardon. I think I will skip dessert, I said, dropping the napkin on the table. I have to make a phone call. It seems my husband's transfer papers need a signature, and I am the only one who can sign them. I turned to Julian. Get the car. We are going back to St. Mary's Hill. If Martha wants a war, she can have one. But she is not taking my prisoner. The windshield wipers of the Aston Martin slashed back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the torrential downpour that was drowning New York City. Julian Blackwood drove with a terrifying, calculated aggression, weaving the low-slung sports car through the heavy traffic on the Queensboro Bridge. I sat in the passenger seat, my knuckles white as I gripped the door handle, my eyes fixed on the GPS tracker on my phone. The red dot representing Richard's biometric signal was moving. It was moving away from the isolation ward and toward the service exit of St. Mary's Hill. Aunt Martha was not wasting time. She had mobilized her cleanup crew before the soup was even cleared from the table. She knew that as long as Richard Sterling had a pulse and a voice, her legacy was standing on the edge of a precipice. And Martha Vance did not tolerate risk. She eliminated it. He is moving, I said, my voice low and steady, betraying none of the panic fluttering in my chest. They are taking him to the loading dock. If they get him into a transport vehicle, we lose him. Once he is in the state system, he will be dead within the hour. A tragic suicide in the back of a van. Case closed. Julian shifted gears, the engine roaring as he cut off a taxi, earning a long, angry horn blast that faded instantly behind us. Martha uses a private contractor for these jobs, Julian explained, his eyes scanning the road for police. A company called MedSecure, on paper. They are a medical transport service for high-risk psychiatric patients. In reality, they are mobile execution chambers. They sedate the patient to the point of respiratory failure and call it a complication. We have 6 minutes. Elena, hold on. The car surged forward, the speedometer climbing past 100 miles per hour. I looked out at the blurred city lights. Yesterday, I wanted Richard dead. I wanted to crush him under my heel for what he did to me, for the years of psychological torture, for selling our son. But tonight, Richard was no longer my husband. He was my evidence. He was the only weapon I had against the woman who had murdered my father. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. I was risking my life to save the man who had tried to destroy it. But that is the rule of war. The enemy of my enemy is my asset, and I protect my assets. At St. Mary's Hill, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The security feed on my tablet showed 3 men in dark tactical paramedic uniforms storming the nurses' station in the VIP wing. They moved with military precision. Dr. Kane stood in their path, holding a clipboard, his face pale but determined. He was trying to stall them, citing protocols and transfer regulations. The leader of the group, a man with a buzz cut and cold, dead eyes, simply shoved a piece of paper into Kane's chest. It was a court order. Emergency transfer mandate signed by a judge who was undoubtedly on Martha's payroll. When Kane tried to block the corridor, the leader didn't argue. He drew a stun baton and drove it into Kane's stomach. The doctor crumbled to the floor, gasping for air, incapacitated. The camera feed cut to black as one of the men smashed the lens with the butt of a flashlight. They were scrubbing the scene as they went. They took down Kane, I reported, closing the tablet. They are at the cell. They are dragging him out now. I could imagine the scene. Richard, still groggy from the electroconvulsive therapy. His mind fractured, his body weak. He would be terrified. He knew exactly what a transfer meant. He had threatened me with it enough times. Now, the monster was being fed to a bigger beast. Julian drifted the car around the final corner, the tires screeching in protest against the wet asphalt. The imposing iron gates of St. Mary's Hill loomed ahead. The guard booth was empty. The gate was wide open. They had cleared the path for a quick exit. There! Julian pointed. In the distance, near the service entrance, a black ambulance with tinted windows was idling. The rear doors were open. Two men were hauling a struggling figure in a gray jumpsuit toward the vehicle. Even from here, I could see Richard fighting. He was kicking, thrashing, desperate to stay on the ground, desperate to stay in the prison I had built for him because he knew the freedom Martha offered was the freedom of the grave. They threw him into the back like a sack of medical waste. The doors slammed shut. The ambulance engine revved, its lights flashing silently. It began to accelerate toward the main gate. Toward us. "Block them," I ordered. "Do not let them leave this property." Julian did not hesitate. He slammed the brakes and spun the wheel. The Aston Martin fishtailed, sliding sideways across the wet pavement until it came to a halt directly in the center of the exit lane, forming a multi-million-dollar barricade. The ambulance driver slammed on his brakes, the heavy vehicle skidding to a stop just inches from my passenger door. The headlights blinded me for a second. Then, silence. The rain drummed on the roof, the only sound in the tense standoff. Julian unbuckled his seatbelt. He reached under his seat and pulled out a telescoping steel baton. "Stay in the car until I secure the perimeter," he said calmly. "These men are not doctors. Do not treat them like civilians." He opened his door and stepped out into the rain, his suit instantly soaked. Looking like a wraith of vengeance, I watched as the driver and the passenger of the ambulance stepped out. They were big men, thick-necked and heavy-handed. They wore utility belts that held zip ties, sedatives, and silenced pistols disguised as medical equipment. "Move the vehicle," the driver shouted, his hand resting on his hip near his weapon. "This is an emergency medical transport. You are obstructing a federal transfer." Julian walked toward them. His baton collapsed and hidden in his sleeve. He looked relaxed, almost bored. "I am afraid there has been an administrative error," Julian said, his voice carrying over the rain. "That patient is under the legal guardianship of the Vance Trust, unless you have a signature from the trustee. He goes nowhere." The driver sneered. "I have a court order. Pal, move the car, or I will move it for you." He signaled his partner. The second man moved to flank Julian, reaching for the taser on his belt. It was a coordinated attack. They intended to drop him and push our car into the ditch. But they had made a critical mistake. They assumed Julian was a lawyer. Julian was a fixer. As the second man drew his taser, Julian moved. It was a blur of motion, efficient and brutal. He sidestepped the taser prongs, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted it with a sickening snap. The man howled, dropping the weapon. Julian drove the steel baton into the man's solar plexus, collapsing him instantly. The driver went for his gun. I didn't think. I opened my car door and stepped out, leveling my own revolver at him. "Drop it," I commanded. My voice did not shake. "Drop it, or I will blow your knee out and leave you here for the police." The driver froze. He looked at Julian, who was standing over his groaning partner, and then at me, the woman holding a gun with practiced ease. He realized the paycheck Martha offered was not worth dying for tonight. He slowly raised his hands, backing away. "Fine," he spat. "You want the trash? You can have him. The lady said he was a liability anyway." He tossed the keys to the ambulance onto the wet ground. Julian kicked them toward the drain. "Run," Julian said softly, before I changed my mind. The driver turned and bolted into the darkness, leaving his partner writhing on the asphalt. I walked past Julian, past the groaning man, to the back of the ambulance. My heart was pounding, but my face was stone. I grabbed the handle of the rear doors and yanked them open. The interior smelled of antiseptic and fear. Richard was huddled in the corner, strapped to a gurney. His face was bruised, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He looked small, broken. When he saw me, he flinched, expecting a blow. "Elena," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Elena, please, do not let them take me. They were going to kill me. They said I was tired. They said Martha wanted me to sleep." He was trembling violently. The man who had terrorized me for 3 years, who had ruled my life with an iron fist, was now begging me for salvation. I climbed into the ambulance and loomed over him. I did not untie him immediately. I needed him to understand the new hierarchy. I took a switchblade from my purse, a gift from Julian, and held it to his throat. Richard stopped breathing. His eyes locked on mine. "Listen to me very carefully." "Richard," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "5 minutes ago, you were dead. Martha signed your death warrant. The only reason you are still breathing is because I decided you might still have a use." I pressed the blade slightly against his skin, just enough for him to feel the cold steel. "You called her. You begged her. And she threw you away like garbage. Do you understand that?" "Yes," Richard sobbed, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. "Yes. She betrayed me. She is the devil." "No, Richard," I corrected him. "She is a businesswoman, just like me. And right now, I am making an acquisition." I cut the straps binding his chest, then his arms. He sat up, rubbing his wrists, looking at me with a mixture of fear and awe. "I can walk away right now," I told him, pointing to the open doors where the rain was pouring in. "I can get back in my car and let the next crew come for you. Or, you can get in my car. But if you get in my car, you belong to me. You do what I say. You sign what I say. And when the time comes, you testify against Martha and destroy her. Those are the terms." Richard looked out at the dark night, at the wet pavement where the cleaner lay groaning. He looked at the imposing figure of Julian Blackwood standing guard by the Aston Martin. Then he looked back at me. He saw the fire in my eyes, the cold determination that had replaced the fear. He realized that the wife he thought he knew was gone. In her place was a queen who had just conquered the board. "I will do it," Richard whispered, bowing his head. "I will do whatever you want. Just do not let her kill me." "Good choice," I said, stepping back and gesturing to the rain. "Get up, and try not to bleed on my leather seats. It costs a fortune to clean." Richard stumbled out of the ambulance, limping toward my car, a broken man seeking shelter in the shadow of the woman he had underestimated. I watched him go, feeling a strange, dark satisfaction. I had not just saved him, I had enslaved him. And now, I had the witness I needed to bring down the real villain of this story. I closed the ambulance doors with a heavy slam. The war was far from over. But tonight, I had stolen the enemy's ammunition. The safe house was a hollowed-out industrial loft in the South Bronx, a relic of a failed textile business that Julian had acquired through a shell company years ago. It smelled of rust, damp concrete, and the lingering copper scent of old machinery. A sharp contrast to the lavender-scented air of the Vance estate. I pushed Richard into the single wooden chair in the center of the room, the sound of the legs scraping against the gritty floor echoing in the vast, empty space. He collapsed into it, his expensive suit now ruined by rain and grease. His face a map of purple bruises and swelling from the rough handling of Martha's transport team. Julian moved with the efficiency of a shadow, securing the heavy iron door with 3 different deadbolts before turning to check the perimeter monitors. We were off the grid. No heat, no luxury, just the cold, hard reality of survival. I stood over Richard, crossing my arms, looking down at him not as a wife, but as an interrogator. You have exactly 5 minutes to make yourself useful. Richard, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a razor. You said you have leverage. You said you know where the bodies are buried. Start digging. Richard shivered, clutching his ribs, his eyes darting between me and the gun Julian had placed on the metal table. Water, he croaked. Please. Elena. I need water. I kicked the leg of his chair. Hard enough to rattle his teeth, but not enough to tip him over. Information first, hydration second. Tell me about the Black Ledger. Martha said you were laundering money. Who for? And where is the proof? Richard swallowed hard. Realizing the power dynamic had shifted permanently, he was no longer the CEO. He was a loose end that I had temporarily tied up. It is not just money laundering, Richard whispered, leaning forward, his voice trembling with the weight of the secret he had carried. Martha is not just stealing from the trust. She is the primary banker for the shadowy syndicate known as the Obsidian Cartel. They move billions through the Vance Children's Hospitals, donations that are actually drug money, equipment purchases that never happen. The room seemed to drop in temperature. My father's legacy. The hospitals he built to save lives were being used to wash blood money. And the ledger, I pressed, stepping closer. The digital record of every transaction. You said you had it. Where is it? Richard looked up, a pathetic smile touching his lips. I knew she would try to kill me eventually, so I made a copy. A micro SD card, encrypted. It has everything. Martha's signatures, the cartel contacts, the hit order on your father. Where is it? Richard, Julian demanded from the shadows, his patience wearing thin. Richard looked at me, his eyes softening with a manipulative nostalgia. I hid it in the one place I knew Martha would never look, the one place she thinks is just sentimental trash. Do you remember the porcelain doll your father gave you for your 10th birthday? The one with the blue dress and the glass eyes? I froze. Miss Hattie. It sat on the shelf in my old bedroom at the penthouse. A creepy antique I had kept only because it was the last gift from my father before he became distant. It is in the left eye, Richard said. I popped the glass eye out, slid the card behind it, and glued it back. It is sitting right there in your bedroom. Elena. The evidence to put her away for life is staring you in the face every night. Before I could process the absurdity of it, Julian's phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a proximity alert. He grabbed the remote for the wall-mounted television, a dusty flat screen left by the previous tenants. We have a problem, Julian said, turning on the news. The screen flickered to life, bathing the dark loft in the harsh blue light of the CNN breaking news banner. Breaking news, Iris wanted for kidnapping. The headline ran across the bottom of the screen in bold red letters. And there, standing at a podium surrounded by microphones, was Aunt Martha. She was no longer the cold executioner I had seen at dinner. She was a masterpiece of performative grief. She wore no makeup. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she clutched a tissue to her trembling lips. My niece, Elena Vance, has suffered a severe psychotic break. Martha sobbed into the microphones, her voice cracking perfectly. She has been battling mental illness since the tragic death of her father. We tried to get her help. We tried to admit her to St. Mary's Hill for treatment. But today she snapped. Martha paused to wipe a tear, and the camera zoomed in on her shaking hands. She and an armed accomplice hijacked the medical transport vehicle carrying her husband, Richard Sterling. They kidnapped him at gunpoint. Richard is a sick man. He needs medication. We are terrified for his safety. The police commissioner stepped up to the microphone, his face grim. We have issued a federal warrant for the arrest of Elena Vance and Julian Blackwood. They are considered armed and dangerous, if you see them. Do not approach. Call 911 immediately. She is good, Julian muttered, watching the screen with a dark admiration. She spun the narrative before we could even park the car. Now we are not whistleblowers. We are unhinged criminals. He pulled out his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I need to check our liquidity. A moment later, he slammed the laptop shut, his jaw tightening. She activated the morality clause in the trust. Your accounts are frozen. My accounts are flagged. Every credit card, every offshore holding, it is all locked down. We have zero access to funds. We cannot even buy gas, let alone a lawyer. I looked at the screen, at the woman who had murdered my father, now using his name to destroy me. She had stripped me of my money, my reputation, and my freedom in less than 2 hours. We are ghosts. Richard whimpered. We are dead. The cartel will find us before the police do. Martha will send the cleaners. I walked over to the window, peering through the grime at the desolate street below. A police siren wailed in the distance, a lonely, mournful sound. I felt the walls closing in, the suffocating weight of the trap Martha had sprung, but panic was a luxury I could not afford. I turned back to the men, my spine straightening. We are not dead, I said, my voice cold and hard. We have one advantage. She does not know we know about the doll. She thinks Richard is just a liability to be silenced. She does not know he planted the bomb in her house. The penthouse is a crime scene, Julian argued, standing up. There will be police stationed at the lobby. The elevators are locked. You cannot just walk in there and pick up a doll. I know the service entrance, I countered. I know the blind spots in the security grid because I designed them to hide from Richard. We go tonight. We get the doll. We send the files to the FBI, the New York Times, and the cartel themselves. Let them tear Martha apart. It was a suicide mission. But it was the only move left on the board. Julian looked at me, assessing the madness in my plan, and then slowly nodded. I can loop the camera feed for 10 minutes. That is all you will have. Wait, Richard said, his face draining of what little color it had left. He was staring at the television again. The news coverage had shifted to a live shot outside my penthouse building. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the wind. A reporter was standing next to a large moving truck. Police are currently searching the residence, the reporter said. But in a gesture of goodwill, Martha Vance has already ordered the removal of Elena's personal effects to be donated to the city's underprivileged children charities. My heart stopped. The camera panned to a worker carrying a box out of the building. It was a clear plastic bin. Inside, amidst a pile of designer clothes and shoes, sat a porcelain face staring blankly at the streetlights. Miss Hattie. She is clearing the house, Richard gasped. She is scrubbing it. That truck. I pointed at the screen, my finger trembling. Read the side of the truck. Where is it going? The camera blurred as the truck pulled away, but I caught the logo painted on the side. Second Chance Charity, Warehouse and Distribution Center. Queens. She gave away the evidence, Julian said, grabbing his car keys. She donated the smoking gun to charity. We have to get to that warehouse, I said, grabbing my coat. Before that doll ends up in a bargain bin or a trash compactor. It is across the city, Richard cried. The police are looking for your car. Then we steal a new one, I said, kicking the door open. Move. Tonight. We are not just fugitives. We are thieves. The stolen bakery truck rattled over the potholes of the Queensboro Bridge, the smell of stale yeast and diesel fumes filling the cab. It was a humiliating downgrade from the Aston Martin we had abandoned in a parking garage in the Bronx. But Julian insisted that a vehicle with a giant picture of a croissant on the side was the last thing the police would look for. I sat in the middle seat, squeezed between Julian and a trembling Richard Sterling. My husband was no longer the arrogant master of the universe. He was a broken man, clutching his bruised ribs, his eyes darting at every pair of headlights that passed us in the driving rain. We were not just fugitives, we were ghosts, driving a bread truck into the heart of an industrial wasteland. The destination was the Second Chance Charity Distribution Center, a massive, sprawling warehouse complex near the airport where the city's unwanted memories went to die, or in my case, where my Aunt Martha had sent my father's legacy to be shredded. Julian killed the headlights as we approached the perimeter fence. The warehouse loomed in the darkness like the carcass of a beached whale, silent and imposing. There were no security guards at the gate, just a rusted padlock that Julian snapped with a pair of bolt cutters he had found under the driver's seat. We drove through the yard, navigating a maze of shipping containers and discarded pallets. The rain provided cover, masking the sound of our engine, but it also turned the ground into a slick, treacherous mud pit. "We go in through the loading dock," Julian commanded, parking the truck in the shadow of a dumpster. "Richard, you stay close. If you run, I shoot you. If you scream, I shoot you. Do you understand?" Richard nodded frantically, wiping rain from his face. "I know the doll," he stammered. "Blue dress. One lazy eye. I put the chip behind the left eye. I swear it is there." We slipped into the warehouse through a side door that had been left propped open with a brick, likely by an employee sneaking out for a smoke break. The interior was cavernous, a cathedral of discarded consumerism. Rows of metal shelving units stretched up into the darkness, stacked 30 feet high with boxes, bags, and loose items. The air was thick with the smell of mothballs, old dust, and the peculiar, sad scent of abandoned lives. It was quiet, save for the rhythmic dripping of a leak in the corrugated metal roof. "The intake section," I whispered, pointing to a chaotic pile of boxes near the front. "The truck from the penthouse left 3 hours ago. The boxes should be in the processing area, waiting to be sorted." We moved quickly, flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. It was a needle in a haystack, but the haystack was made of other people's tragedy. "Here," Julian hissed, waving us over to a row of clear plastic bins labeled Vance Estate Donation. My stomach turned. Martha hadn't just donated my things, she had labeled them like a tax write-off. I saw my designer coats, my books, the silver picture frames that used to hold photos of my son. And there, buried under a pile of cashmere sweaters, was a porcelain hand sticking out. I dug through the clothes, my heart pounding against my ribs. I pulled the doll out. Miss Hattie. Her blue velvet dress was dusty, her painted smile as creepy as I remembered, and sure enough, her glass left eye was slightly askew. "Got it," I breathed, clutching the doll to my chest. "Richard, you genius. Pathetic coward, you actually did it." The sound of a suppressed gunshot is not like in the movies. It is not a bang. It is a sharp, violent thwip, followed immediately by the sound of metal tearing. A bullet shredded the plastic bin inches from my head, sending shards of polymer flying into my face. "Down!" Julian shouted, tackling me to the concrete floor. Another shot sparked off the metal shelving unit above us, showering us with rust. We scrambled behind a pallet of winter coats. Richard was cowering in a ball, covering his head. "They found us!" he shrieked. "The cartel found us!" I looked down the aisle. At the far end, silhouetted against the faint light of the exit sign, stood a figure. He was dressed in black tactical gear, moving with the unnatural stillness of a predator. He did not speak. He did not shout. He simply raised his weapon, a pistol equipped with a long suppressor, and adjusted his aim. This was not a security guard. This was a cleaner. "The silencer," Julian whispered, recognizing the threat. Martha did not just call the police. She called the Obsidian Cartel's favorite janitor. Julian looked at me, his eyes hard. Take the doll. Go to the loading dock. I will draw his fire. Before I could argue, Julian rolled out from behind cover, firing 3 shots from his revolver to suppress the assassin. The silencer moved fluidly, sliding behind a forklift, returning fire with terrifying accuracy. Go! Julian roared. I grabbed Richard by the collar of his ruined suit. Move, Richard! Unless you want to die in a pile of used clothes. We sprinted down the parallel aisle, our footsteps echoing on the concrete. The sound of gunfire erupted behind us, a chaotic rhythm of loud cracks from Julian's gun and the whispering death of the assassin's weapon. We reached the intersection of the main aisles. I could see the exit door 50 yards away. But suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the top of a shelving unit. The silencer had not stayed to fight Julian. He had flanked us. He dropped down directly in our path, landing silently in a crouch. He stood up, blocking the exit, his gun leveled at my chest. He wore a balaclava that covered everything but his cold, dead eyes. There was no hesitation. He was going to put a bullet in my heart and take the doll. I froze, clutching Miss Hattie, my mind racing. I was unarmed. Julian was too far back. Richard was useless. Give me the doll, the silencer said, his voice a raspy monotone that sounded like grinding stones. And I will make it quick. I looked around. To my right was a towering shelf stacked with heavy boxes of hardbound encyclopedias. A support beam near the bottom looked rusted, bent from years of abuse. It was a gamble. A desperate, physics-defying gamble. Catch! I yelled, tossing the porcelain doll high into the air, toward the darkness of the upper shelves. The assassin's eyes instinctively flicked upward to track the object, in that split second of distraction. I didn't run away. I ran toward the shelf. I threw my entire body weight against the rusted support beam, kicking it with the heel of my boot. The metal groaned. A screeching sound of structural failure. The shelf tipped. It was slow at first, then gathered momentum. The assassin realized the trap too late. He tried to dive, but the avalanche of heavy boxes and steel rained down. Tons of paper and metal crashed onto the concrete floor, burying the aisle in a chaotic cloud of dust and debris. I was thrown backward by the force of the impact, landing hard on my hip. Silence returned to the warehouse, broken only by the settling dust. I scrambled to my feet, looking for the doll. It had landed on a pile of pillows, miraculously intact. I grabbed it, checking the eye. The chip was still safe. Elena. Julian's voice called out from the darkness. He emerged from the dust cloud, limping slightly, blood dripping from a graze on his cheek. We need to leave. Now. That collapse will bring the police. We turned to the exit, but Richard was missing. Where is Richard? I demanded. Looking around the debris field, a low groan came from beneath a twisted metal beam near the edge of the collapse. We rushed over. Richard was pinned by his leg, the heavy steel crushing his ankle. He was conscious, but pale as a sheet. Help me, he wheezed. Do not leave me. Julian grabbed the beam, straining to lift it, but it was too heavy. It is stuck, Julian grunted. We need a jack. We do not have time. Sirens were wailing outside, louder this time. The police were at the gate. And then, the pile of debris shifted. The silencer erupted from the wreckage like a demon rising from hell. He was battered, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, but he still held his gun. He lunged, not at me, but at Richard. He grabbed Richard by the hair, dragging him out from under the beam with a brutal yank that made Richard scream in agony. The assassin pressed the muzzle of his gun against Richard's temple, using him as a human shield. Drop the doll, the silencer hissed, backing toward the rear exit, dragging a sobbing Richard with him. Or the husband dies. I raised the doll, my hand trembling. If I gave it to him, Martha won. If I didn't, Richard died. And if Richard died, I lost the testimony to corroborate the data. But then, Richard looked at me, for the first time in his life. His eyes held no greed, no arrogance, just clarity. Run, Richard choked out. Elena, run with the proof. Burn her down. The silencer smirked beneath his mask. He didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he pistol-whipped Richard, knocking him unconscious. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Keep the doll, the assassin said, his voice chilling. The contract has changed. Martha does not just want the evidence, she wants the traitor. He hoisted Richard's limp body over his shoulder with terrifying strength. She wants him alive. She has a special room prepared for him. She wants to know everything you know. No. I lunged forward, but Julian tackled me, pulling me back into the shadows. We cannot save him, Julian shouted in my ear. If we stay, we all get caught. Richard bought us time. Use it. The back door kicked open, and the silencer vanished into the night with my husband. Blue and red lights flashed through the warehouse windows. The police were breaching the front entrance. Freeze, NYPD. Julian dragged me toward a ventilation shaft he had spotted earlier. I clutched the doll to my chest, tears of frustration stinging my eyes. I had the evidence. I had the weapon to destroy Martha. But she had Richard. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, that what she was going to do to him would make the asylum look like a vacation. I crawled into the dark tunnel, leaving my husband to his fate, promising silently that his suffering would be the fuel for my final fire. The safe house was replaced by the hum of cooling fans and the glow of multiple monitors in Julian Blackwood's private server room. A bunker buried 3 stories beneath a nondescript dry cleaner in Brooklyn. I stood behind Julian, watching lines of code cascade down the screen like green rain, reflecting off the glass eye of Miss Hattie, which sat on the desk like a gruesome trophy. We had extracted the micro SD card, and the contents were far worse than Richard had described. It was not just a ledger, it was a directory of corruption that went all the way to the governor's mansion. We saw names of precinct captains, judges, and senators, all on Martha's payroll. Calling the police was impossible because the police were the ones guarding her front door. We needed a higher power. We needed the public. And we needed the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the only agency large enough to weather the political storm we were about to unleash. The gala starts in 4 hours, Julian said, his fingers flying across a backlit keyboard. The Vance Heart Foundation annual fundraiser at the Plaza Hotel. It is the social event of the season. Every major news network will be there. Martha is scheduled to give the keynote speech at noon, right before she boards her Gulfstream to a non-extradition country in South America. He turned to me, his face illuminated by the harsh light of the monitors. This is our only window, Elena. Once she gets on that plane, she vanishes. And Richard, if she leaves, she will leave Richard in a ditch somewhere with a bullet in his brain to tie up the loose ends. We are going to the gala, I decided, staring at the map of the plaza on the screen. But we are not going in through the kitchen. We are going in through the front door. Julian raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. You are a wanted fugitive, Elena. There will be facial recognition cameras at every entrance. I walked over to the closet where Julian kept his emergency contingencies suits. Cash, passports. I pulled out a garment bag that contained a dress I had bought for a funeral that never happened. Then we give them a face they cannot look away from. Martha wants a villain, I will give her the Black Swan. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of diamonds, champagne, and hypocrisy. 500 of New York's elite were gathered under the massive crystal chandeliers, sipping sparkling wine and pretending to care about pediatric cardiology while gossiping about the scandal of the week. Aunt Martha stood at the podium, bathed in a warm spotlight, looking every inch the benevolent matriarch. She wore a white Chanel suit, symbolizing purity, a stark contrast to the black rot in her soul. Her voice trembled with practiced emotion as she spoke into the microphone. "My heart breaks today," she told the captivated audience and the live television cameras. "My niece, Elena, was always a troubled child, but I never imagined she would harm her own husband. We are praying for Richard's safe return, and we ask for privacy during this nightmare." Up in the audio-visual control booth, a technician slumped over his console. Unconscious from a sleeper hold, Julian Blackwood stepped over him. Locking the door, he inserted a flash drive into the main server. "Ladies and gentlemen," he whispered into his headset, syncing the feed to the giant screens behind Martha. "Please turn your attention to the main stage." Down on the floor, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a dramatic bang that silenced the room. Heads turned. Whispers died. I stood there, framed by the light of the hallway. I was wearing a floor-length gown of midnight black silk, sharp and architectural, with a neckline that plunged dangerously low and a slit that rose high on my thigh. My hair was slicked back, severe and commanding, and my lips were painted a blood-red crimson. I did not look like a fugitive. I looked like the Grim Reaper in couture. I began to walk down the center aisle, the crowd parting for me like the Red Sea. The click of my heels on the marble floor was the only sound in the cavernous room. "Elena." Martha gasped into the microphone, her composure cracking for the first time. "Security. Someone call the police. She is here. She is dangerous." 4 men in tuxedos. Martha's private mercenaries disguised as security started to move toward me, but before they could reach me, the giant screen behind Martha flickered. The logo of the Heart Foundation vanished, replaced by a grainy black and white video. It was footage from a hidden camera in Martha's own study, dated 2 years ago. The audio boomed through the ballroom speakers, clear and undeniable. "Make it look like a heart attack. Richard." Martha's voice thundered through the room, magnified 1,000 times. "My brother is weak. He is going to give the money to charity. We need that money for the cartel shipment. Use the potassium chloride. It is undetectable." The crowd gasped, a collective sound of shock that sucked the air out of the room. Martha spun around, staring at her own face on the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The video cut to a scrolling list of bank transfers, millions of dollars moving from the Children's Hospital Fund directly into accounts labeled Obsidian Logistics. The murmurs turned into shouts. Flashbulbs erupted like a lightning storm. Martha screamed at the tech booth, her voice screeching over the incriminating audio. "Turn it off. Cut the feed. It is a fake. It is AI generated." But Julian had locked the system. The truth continued to play, loop after loop of betrayal. I reached the base of the stage, looking up at the woman who had stolen my life. "It is over, Martha," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "The FBI has the originals. The police outside are federal agents, not your payroll officers." Martha looked down at me, her eyes wild with panic and hate. She realized the game was lost. The mask of the philanthropist fell away, revealing the cornered rat beneath. She grabbed the microphone stand, wielding it like a weapon, but then she signaled to the wings of the stage. "Bring him out!" Martha shrieked. "Bring him out, or I will blow this whole building to hell!" From behind the velvet curtains, the silencer emerged. He was dragging Richard Sterling by the collar of his shirt, Richard was barely recognizable. His face was a swollen mask of purple and red. His arm hung at an unnatural angle, and blood soaked the front of his torn shirt. He was conscious, but barely. The silencer shoved a gun against Richard's temple. Facing the crowd, the guests screamed and scrambled for the exits, overturning tables and shattering glass. The ballroom descended into chaos. "Back off!" Martha yelled, pulling a small pearl-handled pistol from her purse and pointing it at me. "Stay back, Elena, or your precious husband dies right here on national television." She moved behind Richard, using him and the assassin as a human shield. "I am walking out of here. Anyone follows me, he dies." Richard lifted his head, his eyes finding mine. There was no plea for help this time, just a resignation. He knew he was dead either way. I stood my ground, my expression unreadable. I reached into the slit of my dress and pulled out the snub-nosed revolver Julian had given me. The crowd screamed again, but I ignored them. I leveled the gun, not at Martha, but at the space between them. "Shoot him," I said calmly. Martha froze. Richard blinked, confused. Even the silencer hesitated. "What?" Martha stammered. I said, "Shoot him," I repeated, taking a step closer. My aim steady. "Richard Sterling murdered my father. He sold my son. He gaslighted me for 3 years. Do you really think I came here to save him? You are holding a hostage I do not care about. Martha, you have no leverage." It was a bluff. A cold, calculated, psychological bluff designed to shatter Martha's logic. She expected me to be the weeping wife. She did not know how to handle the executioner in that split second of confusion, as Martha looked at Richard to see if he was truly worthless. Richard moved. Perhaps it was the adrenaline, or perhaps it was the realization that he had nothing left to lose. He threw his weight backward, slamming his head into the silencer's nose. The assassin flinched, his gun firing harmlessly into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. I did not hesitate. I fired one shot. Not at Martha, at the heavy crystal chandelier hanging directly above them. The bullet severed the main cable. The massive fixture swung down like a pendulum of justice. The silencer looked up too late. The crystal beast crashed onto the stage, clipping the assassin and sending him sprawling into the orchestra pit. Martha was thrown backward by the force of the impact, dropping her gun. "Federal agents, nobody move." The side doors burst open. Dozens of agents and FBI windbreakers stormed the room. Weapons drawn, they swarmed the stage. The silencer tried to rise but was tackled by 3 agents. Martha scrambled on her hands and knees, trying to reach her fallen pistol, but a boot stomped on her hand. She screamed as she was hauled to her feet, handcuffed, and read her rights. I climbed the stairs to the stage, holstering my weapon. I walked past the wreckage of the chandelier to where Richard lay. He was alive, coughing up dust, looking up at me with a mixture of terror and awe. You told them to shoot me." He wheezed. "I knew you were too stubborn to die." "Richard," I said, looking down at him. "Besides, death is too easy. You owe me a lifetime of testimony." Paramedics rushed in, loading him onto a stretcher as they wheeled him away. He reached out a hand toward me, but I did not take it. He was part of my past. I was looking at my future. Martha was being dragged past me, her white suit ruined, her face a mask of fury. "You think you won," she spat at me. "You think you can run the trust. You are just a little girl playing with fire. The cartel will skin you alive. They do not forgive debts." I leaned in close, so only she could hear. "I am not a little girl, Aunt Martha, and I am not paying your debts. I am collecting them." The agents took her away. The room was clearing out. Julian walked onto the stage from the wings, clapping slowly. That, he said, surveying the destruction, was entirely too dramatic, but effective. The stock price just dipped 20%, but it will rebound by morning when they announce the cleanup. It is done, I whispered, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving me exhausted. The trust is clean. Julian handed me my phone. Not quite. You have a call. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. Blocked ID. My heart skipped a beat. Martha's warning echoed in my ears. I pressed answer and put the phone to my ear. This is Elena Vance. The voice on the other end was distorted, deep, and synthesized. It did not sound angry. It sounded amused. Congratulations, Madam Vance. We watched your performance. Impressive. Martha was inefficient. She lacked your killer instinct. Who is this? I asked, though I already knew. We are the investors, the voice replied. The Obsidian cartel does not care who sits in the chair. As long as the business flows, you disrupted our supply chain today. Usually, that warrants a death sentence, but you also eliminated a liability who was stealing from us. So, we are willing to offer a probationary period. I looked out at the empty ballroom, at the shattered crystals on the floor that looked like diamonds. I had destroyed the monsters in my home, only to find out the house was built on a graveyard of monsters. I could run. I could go to the FBI. Or I could do what a Vance was born to do. Rule. I am not Martha, I said into the phone, my voice hardening into steel. I do not take orders. If you want to do business with the Vance Trust, you do it on my terms. No more skimming. No more drugs in my hospitals. We renegotiate the contract. Or I release the rest of the files I held back from the FBI. There was a pause on the line. A long, heavy silence. Then, a low chuckle. You drive a hard bargain. Elena, just like your father. Welcome to the family. We will be in touch. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. Julian was watching me, a question in his eyes. What did they say? I looked at him, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. The Black Swan had not just survived the dance, she had taken over the theater. They said, I replied, smoothing my dress, that I am the new boss. 6 months is a long time in the world of high finance, long enough to turn a grieving widow into a corporate shark, and long enough for the view from the 45th floor of the Vance Tower to change from terrifying to intoxicating. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the ants scurrying along Fifth Avenue, my reflection ghosting against the glass. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. Gone were the soft cardigans and the messy buns of the exhausted mother. In their place was a razor-sharp silhouette clad in a bespoke crimson power suit. My hair cut into an asymmetrical bob that framed a face devoid of mercy. I turned back to the man sweating profusely in the leather chair across from my desk. Mr. Henderson, the chief financial officer who had served my Aunt Martha for 20 years, was trembling so violently that the ice in his water glass chimed like a death knell. Please, Madam Vance. Henderson stammered, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that cost more than my first car. I was just following orders. Martha signed the checks. I only balanced the books. I have a family. My daughter is starting Yale in the fall. I picked up the tablet on my desk. Scrolling through the severance package Julian had prepared, it was empty. 0. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice smooth and cold, like vodka straight from the freezer. You authorized the purchase of faulty MRI machines for the pediatric wing 3 years ago. You knew the surplus budget was being funneled to the Obsidian cartel, and you listed it as consulting fees. You did not balance the books. You cooked them. I tapped the screen. sending a command to the Human Resources server. Your pension has been seized to cover the legal fees of the upcoming audit. Your stock options have been revoked under the morality clause. And security is currently packing a cardboard box with your personal effects. You have 5 minutes to vacate the building before I have you arrested for corporate espionage. Henderson's face turned a shade of gray usually reserved for corpses. You cannot do this, he whispered. I know where the bodies are buried. I smiled, leaning forward, resting my manicured hands on the obsidian desk. Mr. Henderson, I am the one who dug the graves. Get out. 2 security guards materialized at the door, flanking him like statues, as they dragged the weeping executive out of my office. I felt nothing. No guilt. No hesitation. Only the cold, hard satisfaction of pruning a dead branch from my family tree. This was the price of the crown. You either ruled with an iron fist, or you were crushed by it. The door opened again, and Julian Blackwood walked in. He looked tired. The shadows under his eyes had deepened over the last 6 months, a testament to the sleepless nights we spent rebuilding the Vance Trust from the ashes of Martha's scandal. He held a tablet, his knuckles white. We have a problem, Julian said, skipping the pleasantries. Apex Capital. They just dumped 2 million shares of Vance Medical on the market. They are shorting us. Elena, aggressively. Someone is betting big that we are going to fail by noon. I walked over to the bank of monitors on the wall. The stock ticker was bleeding red. My company's value was plummeting. Apex Capital is a shell company, I said, recognizing the tactic. Who is funding them? We trace the IP, Julian replied, his voice grim. It is routing through a prison server in upstate New York. It is Martha. She is trading from her cell. I clenched my jaw, even behind bars, waiting for a trial that kept getting delayed by her high-priced lawyers. Aunt Martha was still pulling strings. She wanted to bankrupt me before she even stepped into a courtroom. She wants a war of attrition, I muttered. She wants to bleed me dry so I cannot afford to keep Richard alive as a witness. There is more, Julian said, lowering his voice. The receptionist just buzzed. There is a man here to see you. He does not have an appointment, and he refused to give his name, but he showed security a black card with an obsidian symbol on it. My blood ran cold. The 6-month honeymoon period was over. The investors were calling. Send him in, I ordered. Smoothing my jacket, Julian stepped forward, blocking my path. Elena, do not do this. Let me handle it. You do not need to be in the room with these people. I looked at Julian, seeing the fear he tried to hide. I am already in the room. Julian, I have been in the room since the night I took that phone call at the plaza. Send him in. The man who entered my office did not look like a gangster. He looked like he had just walked off the runway of Milan Fashion Week. He was tall, with skin the color of mocha and eyes that were an unsettling shade of amber. He wore a navy suit that fit him like a second skin, and he moved with a fluid, predatory grace that made the air in the room feel heavy. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't bow. He walked straight to the guest chair, spun it around, and straddled it, resting his arms on the backrest. Madam Chairwoman, he said, his voice a rich baritone that vibrated in my chest. You look even more dangerous in person. The camera at the gala did not do you justice. And you are? I asked, remaining standing behind my desk, maintaining the high ground. You can call me Gabriel, he replied, flashing a smile that was all teeth and charm. I am the representative, the board of directors. The shadow board sends their regards. They are pleased with your cleanup of the hospital accounts. Efficiency is a virtue we admire. He reached into his inner pocket. Julian's hand drifted toward the gun I knew he kept in his waistband. But Gabriel didn't flinch. He pulled out a sleek, silver hard drive and slid it across the polished surface of my desk. However, trust is a currency that must be earned. You have inherited your aunt's position, Elena, but not her credit score. I looked at the drive. What is this? That, Gabriel said, leaning forward, is $50 million in unmarked cryptocurrency. It was acquired through, let us say, aggressive pharmaceutical sales in Eastern Europe. The board needs it converted into clean, legitimate US dollars and deposited into the Vance Trust operating account by 4 o'clock this afternoon. That is money laundering. Julian snapped. You are asking her to commit a federal crime in broad daylight. The FBI has forensic accountants monitoring every transaction we make. Gabriel turned his amber gaze to Julian, dismissing him like a fly. I am not asking, Mr. Blackwood. I am stating a requirement. He turned back to me. We have a shipment arriving at the port of Newark tonight. The customs officials require payment in clean cash. If the money is not ready, the shipment sits. If the shipment sits, we lose profit. And if we lose profit? He paused, checking his vintage Rolex. Speaking of loss, how is little Christopher doing? Soccer practice ends at 3 today. Correct? I hear the new goalie is very aggressive. The threat was subtle, elegant, and terrifying. He knew my son's schedule. He knew exactly where to stick the knife. I felt a surge of nausea, but I forced my face to remain impassive. You are threatening my son, I stated flatly. I am motivating a partner. Gabriel corrected. $50 million? Clean? By market close. Do not disappoint us. Elena. Martha was disappointing. That is why she is in a cage. Do not make us put you in a box. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the door. Tick-tock. Madam Chairwoman. The door clicked shut. The silence in the room was deafening. Julian grabbed the hard drive, looking ready to smash it. We cannot do this. Elena. The FBI is watching the accounts. If you try to wash $50 million in 4 hours, the SEC will freeze the company before the transfer even clears. We go to jail. Or the cartel kills Christopher. It is a trap. Martha set this up. She tipped them off to test you. It is a test. I agreed, my mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. If I fail, I am incompetent. If I get caught, I am removed. Either way. Martha wins. I looked at the red stock ticker on the wall. Apex Capital was still hammering my stock. They were driving the price down, trying to trigger a panic sell-off. And then, the pieces clicked into place. The chaos, the threat, the money. It wasn't a trap. It was an opportunity wrapped in a death sentence. Julian, I said, a dangerous smile spreading across my lips. Who owns Apex Capital? It is an anonymous shell, Julian replied, confused. Why? Because, I said, picking up the hard drive. Money laundering is only a crime if you cannot explain the source of the funds, but if the funds are used for a legitimate corporate acquisition, it is just business. I walked to the computer. Apex is attacking us. They are shorting the stock. That means they are leveraged. They are borrowing shares they do not own. Elena, what are you doing? Julian asked, watching me type furiously. I am not going to wash the money, I said, my eyes locking onto the screen. I am going to spend it. I am going to take this $50 million of dirty crypto, route it through our offshore subsidiary in the Cayman Islands, and launch a hostile takeover of Apex Capital. Julian's jaw dropped. You want to buy the company that is attacking you with cartel money? Think about it, I said, the adrenaline flooding my veins. We buy Apex. We instantly own their assets. We liquidate their short positions against us, which drives our own stock price back up. The profit from the stock rebound cleans the money. We pay the cartel their 50 million in clean profit. And we keep the carcass of Apex as a bonus. It is a reverse merger fueled by black money. It is insane, Julian breathed. The SEC will scrutinize the merger for months. Let them, I countered. By the time they unravel the paperwork, the money will be in the cartel's account, Christopher will be safe at home, and I will be the owner of the company Martha is using to fight me. I looked at the clock. We have 3 hours. Get the lawyers on the phone. Tell them we are going hunting. The next 3 hours were a blur of high-stakes gambling. We routed the crypto through a dozen shell companies, bouncing the signal from Singapore to Dubai to New York. At 2:55, 5 minutes before the market closed, the offer hit the table. A $50 million all-cash buyout of Apex Capital. It was an offer way above market value. The anonymous board of Apex Martha's proxies had no choice, by law. They had to accept the offer to maximize shareholder value. They signed. At 3:59, the transaction cleared. Apex Capital belonged to Vance Trust. I immediately ordered the liquidation of their short positions. The Vance stock price rocketed upward, erasing the morning's losses in seconds. The profit generated was exactly $52 million. Clean, legal, taxable. I transferred $50 million to the account number Gabriel had left on the drive. At 4:05, the door opened. Gabriel walked back in. He didn't look smug anymore. He looked impressed. He glanced at his phone, confirming the receipt of funds. Then he looked at the stock ticker, seeing the green arrow pointing up. "You bought the enemy," Gabriel said, a hint of genuine admiration in his voice. "You used our money to swallow your competition, clean the cash through the stock rebound, and paid us back with the winnings. That was not the solution we anticipated." "I told you," I said, leaning back in my chair, sipping the cold espresso Henderson had left behind. "I do not take orders. I make deals. Tell the board their money is clean, and tell Martha she needs to find a new shell company. I just liquidated Apex." Gabriel chuckled, a low, dark sound. "You are a dangerous woman, Elena Vance. The board will be very interested in your future initiatives." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Oh, and Christopher. He scored 2 goals. We had a scout watching. He is safe." When the door closed, Julian slumped onto the sofa, exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding all afternoon. "We survived," he whispered, "but barely. You are playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun, Elena." I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. I felt a rush of power so potent it was almost sexual. I had taken the cartel's money, Martha's weapon, and the FBI's oversight, and I had woven them into a victory. "I am not playing, Julian," I said, turning to face the city that I was slowly conquering. "I am winning. Now, get the car. We are going to the prison. I think it is time I visited my dear Aunt Martha. I want to tell her in person that she is evicted." The Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury was a fortress of gray concrete and razor wire, a place designed to strip the soul of hope. But as I stepped out of the black armored limousine, the heels of my Louboutin stilettos clicking rhythmically against the pavement, I did not feel oppressed. I felt like a conqueror coming to inspect the ruins of a defeated enemy. The guards at the checkpoint recognized the Vance name immediately. They did not subject me to the indignity of a pat-down. Instead, the warden himself escorted me through the heavy steel gates, his eyes averting from my gaze as if looking directly at me might result in his termination. I was no longer just a wealthy heiress. I was the woman who had swallowed a $50 million hedge fund in a single afternoon. I was the predator who had turned the Obsidian cartel into a business partner. The air inside the prison smelled of industrial bleach and despair, but my perfume, a custom blend of jasmine and gunpowder, cut through it effortlessly. I was here to deliver the final nail in Martha Vance's coffin. I sat in the private visitation room, a sterile box separated by a pane of bulletproof glass that was thick enough to stop a magnum round. I placed the leather portfolio on the stainless steel ledge and waited. 2 minutes later, the heavy door on the other side buzzed open. Martha Vance walked in. She looked different. The prison jumpsuit was an ugly shade of khaki that washed out her complexion, and her signature silver hair was pulled back in a severe, messy knot. But her eyes were the same. They were cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of fear. She sat down slowly, picking up the receiver of the internal phone. She did not smile. She simply looked at me with the patience of a spider watching a fly struggle in a web it did not yet know it was caught in. I picked up my receiver, the plastic feeling greasy against my ear. "You look expensive, Elena," Martha said, her voice crackling through the line. "Black suits you. It hides the stains on your soul." I did not come here for fashion advice, Aunt Martha, I replied, my voice steady. "I came to give you an update on your investment portfolio." I opened the portfolio and pressed the document against the glass. It was the deed of sale for Apex Capital, stamped with the seal of the Vance Trust. "I liquidated your shell company yesterday. Every asset, every short position, every hidden account you tried to use to tank my stock price. It is all mine now. You are not just in prison, Martha. You are destitute. I have stripped you of every penny you thought would buy your freedom." I expected rage. I expected her to scream, to pound on the glass, to curse me for destroying her life's work. Instead, Martha leaned forward, her breath fogging the glass. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. It was not the smile of a defeated woman. It was the smile of someone holding a royal flush. "You think money is the only currency that matters," Martha whispered. "You are so much like your father. He thought he could buy safety. You think you can buy power. But you forgot the most basic rule of business. Elena, never invest in a fraudulent asset." "The only fraud here is you," I snapped, closing the portfolio. "Enjoy the public defender. I froze your retainer for the lawyers, too." "How is Christopher?" Martha asked suddenly. The question hung in the air, heavy and incongruous. "My son is fine," I said, my grip on the receiver tightening. "He is safe, he is happy, and he will grow up knowing you only as a cautionary tale." Martha chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Your son, oh, Elena, you really are naive. You spent millions securing your house, hiring guards, buying politicians, all to protect a boy who does not share a single drop of your blood." The room went silent. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to grow louder. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, a cold sliver of ice piercing my chest. "If this is another mind game, it is pathetic even for you." "Think back to the delivery room, Elena," Martha said, her voice dropping to a hypnotic rhythm. 5 years ago, St. Mary's Hill, you had an emergency C-section. You were under heavy sedation. Do you remember seeing the baby come out? Do you remember holding him immediately?" My mind flashed back to that night. The pain, the drugs, the blur of white coats. Richard standing over me, looking pale. I remembered waking up hours later, and the nurse handing me a swaddled bundle. I was exhausted, I stammered. "It was a difficult birth." "It was a orchestrated birth," Martha corrected. "The child you gave birth to was a healthy baby boy, But he had a mark, a strawberry hemangioma on his left shoulder blade, shaped like a teardrop. Your mother had one. You have one. It is the Vance genetic stamp. She paused, letting the words sink in. Does Christopher have that mark? Elena. I stopped breathing. I bathed Christopher every night. I knew every inch of his skin. His skin was flawless. There was no mark, no strawberry birthmark. You are lying, I whispered, but my voice lacked conviction. Birthmarks can fade. Doctors say, I took him. Martha interrupted, her voice sharp as a knife. I paid the doctor $2 million to swap your crying infant with a baby from the orphanage downtown, a baby nobody wanted. You have been raising a stranger's reject for 5 years, pouring your love and your fortune into a genetic dead end, while your real son, my grandnephew, the true heir to the Vance bloodline, has been raised elsewhere. I stood up, the chair screeching backward. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the receiver. Where is he? I screamed, forgetting the guards, forgetting the decorum. Where is my son? Sit down, Martha commanded, her eyes flashing. You are making a scene, and you are not going to get a single answer until you confirm what I just told you. Go ahead, call your lapdog Julian, run the test. I will be right here. I am not going anywhere. I slammed the receiver down and ran out of the room. I ignored the startled looks of the warden. I burst out into the sunlight, gasping for air, feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath my stilettos. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling to dial Julian. He answered on the first ring. Julian, I choked out. Where are you? I am at the tower, Julian replied, sensing the panic in my voice immediately. What happened? Did she threaten you? I need a DNA test, I said, rushing toward the limo. Right now, on Christopher, and on me. Do not ask questions. Just get a sample, a hair, a cheek swab, anything. Send it to the private lab on Lexington. Pay them triple to run it as a priority emergency. I want results in an hour. Elena, what is going on? Julian demanded. Is Christopher hurt? Just do it, I screamed into the phone, slamming the car door. Do it now, Julian. My life depends on it. The next hour was a blur of agony. I sat in the back of the limousine parked just outside the prison gates, staring at my phone until my vision blurred. I replayed every memory of the last 5 years. Did Christopher look like me? Did he have Richard's nose? Or did I just see what I wanted to see? Was the lack of connection Richard felt toward the boy not just cruelty, but a subconscious knowledge that the child wasn't his? The doubt was a poison, spreading through my veins, paralyzing me. Finally, the phone rang. It was Julian. The silence on the other end told me everything before he even spoke. Elena, Julian said, his voice hollow. I ran the test 3 times. I used 3 different markers. Tell me, I whispered, closing my eyes. 0% probability of maternity. Julian said, he is not yours. Elena, he is not related to you, or Richard, or anyone in the family. He is a match for a John Doe profile from the state registry. The phone slipped from my hand and fell onto the plush carpet of the car. A scream tore from my throat, a primal, guttural sound of pure devastation. I curled into a ball, clutching my stomach, feeling a physical pain sharper than any bullet. My boy, my sweet, innocent Christopher. The child I had fought the cartel for, the child I had killed my conscience to protect. He was a lie, a 5-year-old prop in Martha's twisted theater. And somewhere out there, my flesh and blood, the baby I had carried for 9 months, was lost. I did not cry for long. Tears were for the weak. And I had left weakness behind in that hospital room 5 years ago. I sat up, wiping my face with the back of my hand. The grief hardened into a cold, diamond-hard rage. I picked up the phone. "Keep Christopher safe," I told Julian, my voice dead. "He is innocent in this. He is still my son in my heart. But right now, I have to go make a deal with the devil." I marched back into the prison. The guards tried to stop me to check my ID again, but one look at my face made them step aside. I looked like a woman who was about to burn the world down. I walked back into the visitation room. Martha was still sitting there, exactly where I had left her. She hadn't moved. She knew I would be back. I picked up the receiver. "You win," I said. "He is not mine." Martha smiled. A genuine, warm smile that made me want to shatter the glass and strangle her. "It is painful, is it not, to realize your entire world is built on sand? Now, let us talk business." "Where is he?" I asked, pressing my hand against the glass. "Tell me where my son is, and I will not have you killed in the shower block tonight." "Threats do not work on me anymore, Elena." Martha tutted. "I have something you want. You have something I want. It is a simple transaction." She leaned closer. "You are the head of the Vance Trust now. You own the judges. You own the politicians. You are going to pull the strings. You are going to get my case dismissed on a technicality. Contaminated evidence. Procedural error. I do not care how you do it. But I want to walk out of these gates in 48 hours. "And if I do?" I asked. "If I let a murderer walk free, then I will give you the address." Martha said, "I will take you to him. But be warned, Elena, he is not in an orphanage. He is not with a foster family. I placed him with someone very specific. Someone who could teach him the things you never could." "Who?" I demanded. "Who has him?" Martha's eyes gleamed with malicious delight. "You will see. But you better hurry. The person raising him, let us just say he has a very strict curriculum. And I would hate for your son to graduate before you get a chance to say hello." "I will get you out," I vowed, my voice dropping to a whisper. "But the moment I have my son, Martha, I will hunt you down, and I will not put you in prison. I will put you in the ground." "I look forward to the chase, my dear," Martha replied, hanging up the phone. I stood there, watching her walk back to her cell. I was the queen of shadows, the partner of the cartel, the owner of the city. But in that moment, I realized I was still just a pawn in Martha's game. She had taken the one thing money couldn't buy. I turned and walked out of the prison, the sun feeling cold on my skin. I had to free my enemy to save my child, and God help anyone who stood in my way. The glass walls of my office in the Vance Tower felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage, as I watched Julian Blackwood pace back and forth across the Persian rug. He was on the phone with the district attorney, his voice a low, urgent growl that sounded nothing like the calm legal strategist I had hired. I stood by the window, looking down at the city I supposedly owned, gripping a crystal tumbler of scotch so hard my knuckles were white. The DNA test results lay on my desk. A single sheet of paper that had incinerated my reality. Christopher was a lie. My son was a lie. And the truth was locked inside the mind of a sociopath sitting in a federal holding cell. I had spent 6 months building a reputation as a reformer, as the woman who cleaned up the Vance Trust. Today, I was going to burn that reputation to the ground. "I do not care about the optics. Julian," I snapped, interrupting his call. "I do not care if it looks like corruption. Buy the judge, destroy the evidence. Claim Richard was hallucinating under the influence of illegal narcotics when he gave his testimony. I want Martha Vance on the street by noon." Julian ended the call and looked at me, his face pale. "Elena, you are asking me to dismantle a federal case we spent half a year building. If we discredit Richard's testimony to get her out, we can never use him again." Martha walks free, permanently. The double jeopardy clause will attach, and she will be untouchable for the murder of your father. I slammed the glass down, whiskey splashing onto the mahogany. My father is dead. Julian. My son is alive. Somewhere out there. My flesh and blood is being raised by strangers because that woman sold him like a piece of livestock. I will trade a dead ghost for a living child any day of the week. Do it. Or I will find a lawyer who lacks your sudden onset of morality. Julian stared at me for a long moment. Seeing the desperation in my eyes that bordered on madness, he finally nodded, a gesture of defeat. I will trigger the fruit of the poisonous tree defense. We will plant evidence that the recording of Richard was obtained illegally without a warrant. The judge is up for re-election. He needs a donation to his super PAC. I will make the transfer. The wheels of justice did not turn slowly when greased with $10 million. They spun with terrifying speed. By 11 o'clock. The breaking news banners were flashing across every screen in New York. Case dismissed due to procedural misconduct. By 11:30. I was standing outside the heavy steel doors of the detention center, leaning against the hood of my armored SUV. The paparazzi were swarming behind the police barricades, shouting questions, their cameras clicking like a swarm of mechanical locusts. I ignored them. My eyes were fixed on the exit. The door buzzed, and Martha Vance stepped out. She wore a beige cashmere coat that Julian had sent over, and her hair was freshly brushed. She looked less like a prisoner and more like a queen returning from exile. She scanned the crowd, spotted me, and offered a small, triumphant smile that made my blood run cold. She walked toward the car, ignoring the reporters, and slid into the back seat as if I were her chauffeur. I got in beside her. Julian was in the driver's seat, his eyes watching us in the rearview mirror, his hand resting near his holster. The moment the doors locked, the air in the car became toxic. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I pulled the ceramic knife I had strapped to my thigh, a blade that bypassed metal detectors, and pressed the tip against Martha's throat. No more games, I hissed, my voice trembling with suppressed violence. You are out. The charges are dropped. Now give me the address, or I will open your carotid artery right here and dump you on the curb. Martha didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her collar, pushing the blade away with a gloved finger. So dramatic. Elena, you really have embraced the family temper. Put the toy away. You need me alive to get past the security gate, the place we are going. They do not welcome uninvited guests. She leaned forward and whispered a set of coordinates to Julian. Upstate, the Catskills, and Julian, drive fast. It is raining, and the boy hates the mud. The drive took 2 hours, a silent journey through the gray, weeping landscape of rural New York. We turned off the highway onto a private gravel road that wound deep into the forest. Signs warned, restricted area live fire zone and authorized personnel only. This wasn't a residential neighborhood. It wasn't an orphanage. We approached a massive iron gate flanked by guard towers. Men in tactical gear with assault rifles patrolled the perimeter. This was a fortress, a private military compound hidden in the mountains. Helios Global Security, Julian whispered, reading the sign on the gate. This is a training facility for high-end mercenaries. Why is he here? Martha. Martha rolled down the window as a guard approached. She flashed a black card with a gold emblem. The guard nodded, his face impassive, and the gate swung open. We drove through the compound. It was a bleak collection of concrete barracks, obstacle courses, and firing ranges. The rain was coming down hard now, turning the training grounds into a quagmire of mud and misery. Stop here, Martha commanded. We parked near a large, muddy pit surrounded by razor wire. I threw the door open and stepped out into the rain, not caring that my shoes were ruined instantly. I scanned the area, my heart hammering against my ribs. Where is he? I screamed over the sound of thunder. Where is my son? Martha stepped out slowly, opening a black umbrella. She walked to the edge of the pit and pointed downward. Lesson number 1 of the curriculum, she said calmly. Survival. I ran to the edge and looked down. My breath caught in my throat. In the center of the mud pit, a group of children, none older than 6 or 7, were struggling to climb a slippery wooden wall. They were dressed in gray fatigues, soaked to the bone, shivering violently. A massive instructor was shouting at them, spraying them with a high-pressure hose every time they slipped. And there, at the bottom, helping another boy up, was a child with dark hair and eyes that matched my own. He slipped, falling face first into the mud. The instructor barked at him, but the boy didn't cry. He stood up, wiped the mud from his eyes, and glared at the man with a defiance that I recognized instantly. It was the same look I saw in the mirror every morning. I saw the back of his shirt tear as he moved, revealing a small, strawberry-shaped birthmark on his shoulder blade. "Oh my God!" I gasped, my knees buckling. It was him, my baby, my real son. He wasn't playing with toys. He was being trained for war. I scrambled toward the fence, gripping the cold wire mesh. "Stop it!" I screamed at the instructor. "Get away from him. That is my son." The instructor ignored me. The boy looked up, hearing my voice through the rain. He froze, staring at me with confusion. He didn't know who I was. To him, I was just a stranger screaming in the rain. "Open this gate!" I yelled at Julian. "Blow the lock! Get him out of there!" Julian reached for his weapon, but a dozen laser sights suddenly appeared on his chest. Red dots danced across my forehead. We were surrounded. "I would not do that, Mr. Blackwood." A deep, cultured voice boomed from behind us. My security team is very twitchy when it comes to intruders. I spun around. Standing on the porch of the main administrative building was a man who looked like he owned the mountain. He was tall, with silver-streaked hair and a scar running through his left eyebrow. He wore a bespoke suit protected by a trench coat. And he held a crystal glass of brandy. Victor Helios, the arms dealer. The man who sold weapons to both sides of every war in the last decade. A man my father had spent his entire career trying to put out of business. "Victor," I breathed, realizing the horror of the situation. "You have him." Victor smiled, walking down the steps, his shoes crunching on the gravel. He didn't look at Martha. He looked directly at me. "Elena Vance, it has been a long time. You were just a teenager when your father last threatened to have me indicted. And now, here you are, trespassing on my property." He gestured to the pit. "He has potential. You know, strong legs, good reflexes, high pain tolerance. He reminds me of myself at that age." "Give him to me," I demanded, stepping in front of Julian to shield him from the snipers. "He is 5 years old. He belongs in a school, not a boot camp. How much do you want? I will pay you double whatever Martha paid you." Victor laughed, a low, rumbling sound. He took a sip of his brandy. "Money. You think I bought him for money? Martha didn't sell him to me for cash. Elena. She gave him to me as payment for a debt your father owed." He walked closer, invading my personal space. "Your father destroyed my shipment in Benghazi 10 years ago, cost me billions. I told him I would take his future, and I did." He looked toward the boy in the pit. "I named him Ares, after the god of war. He is not a hostage. Elena, he is my heir. I have no sons, so I decided to raise yours to destroy everything your family built." "You are sick," I spat, my hands curling into fists. I will bring the FBI. I will bring the Marines. I will burn this place to ash. You will do nothing, Victor said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Because legally, he is mine. I have the adoption papers, signed by his legal guardian at the time, Martha Vance. It is ironclad. If you try to take him, I will have you arrested for kidnapping. Again. He turned to Martha, who was watching with a satisfied smirk. Thank you for the delivery. Martha, your debt is cleared. You can go. No. I lunged at Victor, but two guards grabbed my arms, restraining me. I thrashed against them, screaming my son's name. Ares, look at me. I am your mother. I am coming for you. The boy in the pit watched me, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he turned his back on me and started climbing the wall again. He had been taught that emotion was weakness. Victor leaned in close to my ear, smelling of expensive tobacco and rain. Do not worry, Elena. You can visit. In fact, I insist on it. He pulled back, a cruel glint in his eyes. After all, we are going to be family. He is my heir. You are his mother. It only makes sense that we unite our houses. He gestured to the sprawling compound. Marry me, Elena. Merge the Vance Trust with Helios Global, and you can tuck him in every night. Refuse, and I will transfer him to my facility in Siberia tomorrow. You will never see him again. The world stopped. I looked at the man who was my father's greatest enemy. I looked at Martha, who was laughing silently. I looked at my son, struggling in the mud, turning into a weapon before my eyes. Victor Helios wasn't just asking for a merger. He was asking for my soul. You have 24 hours to decide, Victor said, turning his back and walking away. Get her off my property. The guards dragged me back to the car. Julian shoved them back, pulling me inside. Elena, we have to go. We can't fight an army. As the car peeled away, sliding in the mud, I stared out the back window. My son reached the top of the wall. He stood there, a tiny silhouette against the gray sky, looking at the retreating car. He didn't wave. He just watched. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't just fighting to save him anymore. I was fighting to save him from becoming me. Take me home, Julian, I whispered, my voice devoid of hope, but filled with a new, terrifying resolve. I need to plan a wedding. The headline on the New York Times website was simple, brutal, and effective. The merger of the century. Beneath it was a photoshopped image of Victor Helios and me, standing side by side like royalty, the caption announcing our engagement to the world. Wall Street loved it. The stock of Vance Trust had climbed 12% since the market opened, and Helios Global Security was up 15%. To the world. This was the union of old money and new military power, a consolidation of influence that would make us untouchable. To me, it was a declaration of war signed in blood. I sat in my office, watching the news feed scroll by, my face a mask of porcelain indifference. The public saw a fairy tale romance. I saw a hostage negotiation televised for a global audience. The intercom buzzed, interrupting the silence. Mr. Blackwood is here, the secretary announced, her voice trembling slightly. And he is upset. The door did not just open, it flew back against the wall with a violence that cracked the plaster. Julian Blackwood stormed in, throwing a stack of files onto my desk, papers scattered across the floor like confetti. He was disheveled, his tie loose, his eyes burning with a mixture of betrayal and exhaustion. Tell me it is a lie, Julian demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Tell me you did not just agree to marry the man who kidnapped your son. Tell me this is some twisted PR stunt to buy time. I remained seated, picking up a pen to sign a requisition form for the wedding venue. It is not a stunt. Julian. The date is set for next Saturday. The ceremony will be held at the Helios estate. You are on the guest list. Try to wear something less agitated. Julian slammed his hands on my desk, leaning over me, invading my space. Have you lost your mind? He is a monster. Elena, he deals in death. He brainwashed your child. And now you are going to walk down the aisle and promise to love, honor, and obey him. You are sleeping with the enemy. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and ugly. I stood up slowly, meeting his gaze with eyes that had seen too much darkness to be intimidated by his anger. I am not sleeping with the enemy, Julian, I said, my voice ice cold. I am infiltrating his command center. Do you think I care about a marriage license? This wedding is the only way to get past his perimeter. Victor has an army. He has snipers. He has walls I cannot climb and codes I cannot break. But a wife has keys. It is suicide, Julian argued, pacing away, running a hand through his hair. Once you are inside, you are his property. He will isolate you. He will control every breath you take. You will be a prisoner in a gilded cage. I walked around the desk and stood in front of him. I am already a prisoner. Julian, my son is in that cage. If I stay out here, Ares remains a soldier for the rest of his life. If I go in, I have a chance to wake him up. I reached out and straightened Julian's tie, a gesture of intimacy that froze him. I need you to be my eyes on the outside, while everyone is watching the bride. I need you to find the holes in his security grid. The wedding day is the distraction, while Victor is busy showing off his new trophy. We are going to burn his fortress down from the inside out. Julian looked at me, searching for the naive woman he had met 6 months ago. She was gone. In her place was a strategist willing to sacrifice her body to win the war. You are playing a dangerous game, Elena, he whispered. If he finds out, I cut him off. He won't, because Victor Helios is arrogant. He thinks he broke me. He thinks I am marrying him out of fear. He has no idea that I am bringing the match to the powder keg. I checked my watch. I have a dinner engagement. My fiancé expects me. Do not wait up. The drive to the Helios estate was a journey into the heart of darkness. The rain had stopped, leaving the night air thick with mist that clung to the trees like ghosts. The iron gates opened automatically as my car approached, scanning my license plate. This time, there were no guns pointed at me. I was the lady of the manor now. I parked in the circular driveway, where a butler was waiting with an umbrella. "Good evening, Madame Vance," he said, his tone perfectly neutral. "Mr. Helios is waiting in the drawing room. Master Ares is with him." My heart skipped a beat at the mention of my son's new name, Ares, the god of war. It was a cruel joke, a constant reminder of what Victor intended to turn him into. I entered the house. It was magnificent and cold, a museum of violence. Antique swords hung on the walls alongside tapestries depicting famous battles. Victor stood by the fireplace, holding a glass of cognac. He looked every inch the aristocrat, handsome in a way that made you forget he sold missiles that leveled villages. When he saw me, his face lit up with a possessive smile. "Elena," he purred, setting his glass down. "You look radiant, but I took the liberty of selecting something more appropriate for our dinner." He gestured to a mannequin standing in the corner. It wore a dress of emerald green silk, tight and revealing, with a diamond choker that looked suspiciously like a collar. "Wear this. Green is the Helios family color. I want you to look like you belong to me." It was a test. He was stripping away my identity, my black power suits, my armor. He wanted to dress me up like a doll to see if I would submit. I looked at the dress, then at him. It is beautiful. Victor, I said, my voice smooth. I will be right back. I changed in the guest room, staring at myself in the mirror. The dress was stunning, but the diamonds around my neck felt heavy, cold against my skin. I looked like a prize, a trophy wife. Perfect. Let him think he owns the packaging while I poison the contents. When I returned to the drawing room, Victor's eyes raked over me with hunger. Perfection, he murmured, kissing my hand. Now, the family is complete. He turned to the shadows near the bookshelf. Aries, come say hello to your mother. A small figure stepped into the light. My breath caught in my throat. My son was wearing a miniature tuxedo, his hair slicked back exactly like Victor's. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid, his face devoid of childish wonder. He looked like a 5-year-old executive, a clone of the man who had stolen him. I fell to my knees, holding out my arms, tears stinging my eyes despite my resolve. Christopher, I whispered, using his real name. Baby, come here. It is me. It is Mommy. The boy did not move. He looked at Victor for permission. Victor gave a slight nod. Aries walked toward me, but he stopped 3 feet away. He did not run into my arms. He did not smile. He looked at me with a terrifying, analytical gaze. My name is Aries, he said, his voice flat and monotone. Father says Christopher was a weak name. It belonged to a victim. The words were like daggers. You are not a victim, I said, my voice trembling. You are my son. I missed you so much. Please, let me hold you. Aries took a step back, looking at my tear-stained face with disdain. Father says crying is a waste of hydration. He says women are emotional. Emotion is a tactical error. He recited the words like a catechism, a lesson beaten into him through sleepless nights and mud pits. Father says you are a weakness. That is why you are here, because you could not fight him. So you joined him. I looked up at Victor. He was sipping his cognac, watching the scene with sadistic pleasure. He was enjoying this. He was showing me that he hadn't just taken my son's body, he had colonized his mind. That is enough, Aries. Victor said smoothly. Be polite. She is going to be your stepmother. We must make allowances for her. Frailty. Victor walked over and placed a hand on Aries' shoulder. The boy leaned into the touch, seeking approval from his captor. It was Stockholm Syndrome weaponized. We are going to be a powerful family. Elena, you bring the money, I bring the muscle. And Aries. Aries will inherit the empire. Victor looked down at the boy. Tell her what we do to enemies. Aries. We liquidate them, the 5-year-old said without hesitation. I wiped the tears from my face. I stood up slowly, the silk dress rustling. The grief in my chest crystallized into something harder, sharper. I realized then that begging would not work. Love would not work. Not yet. Aries respected strength. He had been taught to despise weakness. If I wanted my son back, I couldn't be his mother. I had to be a warrior he could respect. I looked down at the boy, my expression hardening until I mirrored his coldness. Your father is half right. Aries, I said, my voice steady. Emotion can be a weakness, but it can also be fuel. I walked toward him. This time, I did not kneel. I towered over him. You think I am here because I am weak. You think I surrendered. I leaned down, bringing my face close to his, violating his personal space just as Victor did to others. I am not a weakness, Aries. I am the storm that is going to tear this house apart brick by brick. And you are going to watch me do it. The boy blinked. For the first time. The robotic mask slipped. He looked surprised. He had expected pity. Instead, he got power. Now, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. Fix your collar. It is crooked. A soldier must always be impeccable. I reached out, my hands moving with practiced speed. I adjusted his bow tie, smoothing the fabric of his jacket in that split second, while my body blocked Victor's view. My fingers slipped a micro-thin GPS tracker, no larger than a grain of rice, into the hidden seam of his lapel. It was a prototype Julian had developed, undetectable by standard scanners. There, I said, patting his shoulder. Much better. I stood up and turned to Victor. I am ready for dinner now. Darling, all this emotion has given me an appetite. Victor looked at me, a flicker of doubt crossing his eyes for the first time. He had expected me to crumble. He had expected a weeping mother begging for scraps of affection. Instead, he saw a woman who had just stared down his creation and didn't blink. He laughed, but the sound was hollow. Excellent, Victor said, offering me his arm. I like a woman with spirit. It makes the breaking process so much more entertaining. We walked into the dining room, a family of sharks circling each other. Ares walked behind us, touching his collar thoughtfully, looking at me with a new expression. It wasn't love, it wasn't trust, but it was curiosity. And curiosity was the first crack in the wall. As I sat at the head of the table, sipping the wine that tasted like blood, I smiled at my future husband. He thought he had won a wife. He had no idea he had just invited the assassin to the feast. The tracker was live. Julian was watching, and the countdown to the wedding of the killers had officially begun. The organ music swelling through the manicured gardens of the Helios estate was not a hymn of celebration. It was a funeral dirge disguised as Mendelssohn's wedding march. I walked down the aisle, a path strewn with white rose petals that hid the muddy boots of the tactical security team lurking in the shrubbery. 500 guests watched me, a congregation of the world's most dangerous people. There were warlords in tuxedos, corrupt senators in silk, and cartel lieutenants drinking vintage champagne. They were here to witness the merger of the decade. The moment the Vance Trust and Helios Global became a singular, terrifying entity. I wore the dress Victor had chosen, a masterpiece of lace and diamonds that weighed 50 pounds, designed to make me look fragile, like a doll wrapped in expensive paper. But under the layers of silk, strapped to my thigh, was a ceramic knife, and inside the bouquet of orchids I clutched with white-knuckled force was a small, black transmitter button. I looked ahead at the altar. Victor stood there, looking like a king in his midnight blue tuxedo. Beside him stood my son, Ares. The boy looked stiff, robotic, his small hands clasped behind his back, his eyes empty. He was the ring bearer, but in reality, he was the chain that bound me to this altar. I reached the altar, and Victor took my hand. His grip was firm, possessive, the touch of a man claiming a piece of property. The officiant, a Supreme Court justice who owed Victor $3 million in gambling debts, began the ceremony. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to unite this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The words floated over the humid air, meaningless and hollow. I looked at Ares. He was staring at his shoes, disassociating from the scene. He had been trained to endure boredom just as he had been trained to endure pain. I squeezed Victor's hand, digging my nails into his palm just enough to register a warning. But he only smiled, mistaking my aggression for passion. He leaned in close, pretending to brush a stray hair from my face. You look breathtaking, Elena, he whispered, his voice low enough that only I could hear. And just so you know, the moment we say "I do," a digital transfer will execute automatically. The ownership of 3 shipping containers currently sitting in the port of Newark will transfer to your name. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face impassive. And what is in those containers? Victor, I whispered back, maintaining the rictus of a blushing bride. Victor chuckled, a sound that vibrated through his chest. Enough weaponized anthrax to wipe out the entire eastern seaboard. Congratulations. Darling, you are about to become the world's most wanted bioterrorist. If you ever try to leave me, I will tip off the FBI. And you will spend the rest of your life in a black site prison while I raise our son. That is my wedding gift. It was a brilliant, diabolical trap. He wasn't just marrying me, he was framing me. He was ensuring my loyalty by holding a nuclear option over my head. I looked at him, and for the first time, I let the mask slip. I didn't look scared. I looked bored. That is very thoughtful, Victor, I said, my voice steady. But I think you should check your shipping manifest again. I prefer cash. Do you take this man? The justice asked, looking at me expectantly. The silence stretched, tight as a violin string. The guests leaned forward. Victor squeezed my hand harder. A silent threat. I looked at Ares. Then I looked at the camera drone hovering above us, broadcasting this wedding to the world. I pressed the button inside my bouquet. I do, I said clearly. I do take this empire. But I wasn't answering the judge. I was signaling Julian. The instant the words left my mouth, the world went black. The massive floodlights illuminating the garden died. The music cut out with a dying groan. The electronic locks on the perimeter gate slammed shut with a thunderous clang that echoed off the mountains, trapping everyone inside. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by the confused murmurs of 500 criminals realizing they were no longer in control. "What is this?" Victor hissed, grabbing my arm. "Power failure. Backup generators should kick in within 10 seconds. "They won't," I said, ripping my hand away from his grip. "Julian just fried your mainframe, and he also rerouted your shipment." I reached up and tore the heavy lace veil from my head. Throwing it to the ground, I grabbed the microphone from the startled justice. My voice boomed over the emergency backup speakers, harsh and distorted. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is currently breaching the front gate. They have been provided with the GPS coordinates of a bioweapon shipment that was authorized by Victor Helios 5 minutes ago." Pandemonium erupted. The warlords and senators didn't wait for confirmation. They scrambled, overturning chairs, trampling the flower arrangements, running toward the exits that were sealed shut. Victor stared at me, his face twisting from arrogance to pure, unadulterated rage. He reached for the gun concealed in his waistband, but he stopped. He realized he was on camera. The drone was still recording, its red light blinking in the twilight. "You bitch!" he snarled. "You destroyed everything. I will kill you." "Do it," I challenged, spreading my arms. "Kill me on live television. Add murder to the list of treason and terrorism charges." Victor looked around, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. He saw his security team overwhelmed by the panic of the guests. He looked at the sky, hearing the thumping rhythm of approaching helicopters. They weren't his. They were government choppers. He made a tactical decision. He lunged. Not at me, but at Ares. He grabbed the boy by the back of his tuxedo jacket, hauling him off the ground. "If I go down, I take the air," Victor roared, pulling a silver pistol and pressing it against the boy's temple. Ares didn't scream. He didn't cry. He hung there, limp, his eyes wide, waiting for the end. "Let him go!" I screamed, the mother in me overriding the strategist. I took a step forward. But Victor cocked the hammer. "Back off," he shouted. "I will do it. I trained him to die. He knows his duty." The guests had cleared the blast zone, leaving just the three of us on the altar of ruin. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I looked at my son, the boy who had called me weak. I looked at the man who had turned him into a tool. And I realized that saving Ares wasn't about shielding him, it was about empowering him. I reached down and hiked up my skirt, ripping the ceramic knife from its sheath, but I didn't throw it at Victor. I threw it at the ground, right at Ares's feet. It landed with a dull thud in the rose petals. "Ares!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the noise of the choppers. "Look at me." The boy's eyes shifted to mine. "Victor told you that you are a weapon," I yelled. "He told you that emotion is weakness. He is wrong. You are not a weapon. You are a king. And a king does not let a usurper hold a gun to his head." Victor laughed, a manic sound. "He won't listen to you. I broke him. I rebuilt him. He belongs to me." "Ares," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper that somehow carried over the wind. Lesson number 1 of survival. Identify the threat. Eliminate the threat. Who is the threat? Ares, is it the mother who came for you? Or the man holding a gun to your head? The boy's face changed. The robotic mask cracked. A spark of anger, hot and genuine, ignited in his eyes. He realized the logic. Victor was violating the very code he had taught. Protect the asset. Victor was threatening the asset. Ares moved. It was a move Victor had taught him in the mud pit. He didn't try to run. He went limp, dropping his entire body weight, forcing Victor to adjust his grip. As Victor stumbled forward, Ares spun, stomping his small patent leather shoe onto Victor's instep with precise, brutal force. Victor howled in surprise, his grip loosening just for a fraction of a second. Ares hit the ground and rolled. He grabbed the ceramic knife I had thrown. He didn't attack. He scrambled backward, putting distance between himself and Victor. He stood up, holding the knife in a defensive posture, his small hand trembling, but his eyes fierce. He stood between me and Victor. He had chosen the mother. Victor stared at the boy, shock replacing the anger. "You ungrateful little brat," he spat, raising his gun again. "I made you—" "You stole me," Ares said. His voice was small, but it did not waver. "And my mother is right. You are the threat." Suddenly, a laser dot appeared on Victor's chest, then another, and another. The FBI snipers had taken positions on the perimeter wall. "Drop the weapon!" A voice amplified by a megaphone boomed from the sky. "Victor Helios, drop the weapon and surrender." Victor looked at the snipers, then at me, then at the boy who held a knife against him. He knew checkmate when he saw it. He slowly lowered the gun, a smile returning to his face. A cold, promising smile. "This is not over, Elena," he said, backing away toward the edge of the cliff that overlooked the ocean. "You kept the boy, but you inherited the war. You have no idea what is coming for you." A black helicopter, unmarked and silent, rose from the cliff edge behind him. It was his contingency plan. A rope ladder dropped. Victor grabbed it, holstering his weapon. The snipers fired, but the helicopter deployed flares, blinding the sensors with bursts of magnesium fire. The wind from the rotors knocked me to my knees. I watched as Victor Helios ascended into the dark sky, hanging from the ladder like a dark angel, laughing as he vanished into the night. The police swarmed the garden. Agents were tackling guests, shouting orders, but I didn't move. I crawled across the rose petals to my son. Ares was still holding the knife, breathing hard. I didn't hug him immediately. I didn't want to smother him. I sat in front of him, on my knees, ruining the multi-million-dollar dress. You did good, Ares, I said softly. You assessed the situation. You executed the countermeasure. You were brave. Ares looked at the knife, then at me. He dropped the blade. His lip quivered. The soldier vanished, and a 5-year-old boy remained. He collapsed into my arms, burying his face in my neck. He didn't cry, but he held on as if he were drowning. I wrapped my arms around him, feeling his small heart beating against my chest like a trapped bird. I have you, I whispered. I have you. And I am never letting go. Julian appeared from the chaos, flanked by federal agents. He looked exhausted but triumphant. He got away, Julian said, looking at the empty sky. He is gone, Elena. But we got the shipment. The files you uploaded. They are enough to dismantle his domestic operations. He is a fugitive now. He will be back, I said, standing up, lifting Ares into my arms. He felt heavy, solid, real. He will come back for his heir, and he will come back for his pride. What do we do now? Julian asked, looking around the ruined wedding, at the overturned chairs and the fleeing guests. The Vance trust is exposed. You just admitted to an alliance with the cartel on a hot mic to get here. The legal fallout will be catastrophic. I looked at the estate. It was a fortress. It had walls, armories, and bunkers. It was safer than the penthouse. We do not leave, I said, looking at the massive stone mansion that Victor had built. This is my house now, by marriage, by conquest, by right of possession. We stay here. I walked toward the house, carrying my son. The FBI agents parted for us. Unsure whether to arrest me or salute me, I walked up the stone steps to the main entrance. I turned back to look at Julian. Call the lawyers. Call the cartel. Tell them the management has not changed. Only the location. Victor wanted a partner. He got a usurper. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped into the foyer of the Helios estate. I walked straight to the main hall, where Victor's massive, high-backed chair sat like a throne before the fireplace. I sat down, settling Ares on my lap. The fire was still burning, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I looked at the antique swords, the tapestries of war. I was no longer just Elena Vance, the heiress. I was the woman who had outsmarted a demon and stolen his kingdom. Let him run, I whispered to the empty room, stroking my son's hair. A wounded animal is dangerous, yes, but a mother protecting her young is lethal. I looked into the camera of the drone that was still hovering outside the window, knowing Victor was watching the feed from wherever he was running. My eyes were dry. My hands were steady. Come and get it, Victor, I said. Class is in session.